I now call to order the August 10th, 2017 meeting of the City of Nashua Planning Board. Mr. Secretary, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Donches,
Here.
Mike Peterson, Adam Varley,
Here.
Scott Leclerc,
Here.
Ed Weber, here, Alderman Sean McGinnis, Alderman Thomas Lopez, Steve Ducrain,
Present.
Dan Kelly,
Present.
David Robbins,
Present.
Jerry Rapucci,
Here.
Chanel Mystery. Megan has resigned.
And all regular members participating and voting this evening. And Mr. Weber, I know you wanted to speak before we got
Yes.
started with anything further.
Roger has gone under some surgery. He's watching tonight, and I would like, if it'd be possible for us to say, welcome, get well, and come back soon.
Get well, Roger.
Get well, Roger.
Get well, Roger.
So next up on the agenda, we have approval of the minutes from the July 13th, 2017 meeting. Were there any questions or comments on the minutes before I take a motion? Mr. Leclerc?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the July 13, 2017 Planning Board as written.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc is to approve the minutes as presented. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions? Mr. Robbins?
Yes.
Okay. Communications. Good evening, Linda.
Good evening. In your folder this evening, you'll find several items. The first is an amended agenda. The only change is the addition of the amendment of the capital improvements program under other business. Then you have a letter from engineering regarding case number 2, and with that is also some letters of some support from the abutters. Then you have a letter from engineering regarding case number 4. And then regarding the capital improvements, other business number 2. And finally, we have some plans for our discussion item, which is going to be 44 Simon Street. And that's it.
Great. Thank you. Report of committee and liaison. Mr. Kelly, Mr. Weber, anything to report?
Yes, later on, we'll be discussing the CIC recommendations for the PAC.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Weber?
Yes, July 24th, HDC had a meeting. First on the agenda was 24 Railroad Square, request to approve erect a perimeter fence, parking gates, and security improvement. The request was approved. Number 2 was 1214 Front Street, which is coming before the board tonight, requesting approval to construct 2 parking areas totaling 53 square spaces with site improvements, providing parking for the Greely house and additional parking for recently approved multifamily resident project at 34 Franklin Street. The request was approved. Number 3 was 11 Main Street, requesting approval to install a new wall sign exterior, and it was approved. And there's ongoing discussions on the expansion of the historic district to include Greely Park. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So Linda went through all the documents in the packet, additional to what we had received, but we found 2 pieces on my desk. Are those additional discussion items?
No, I think if one is the ordinance that was passed around, that's just the current elderly housing ordinance with reference to the first plan on the agenda.
I see.
And I don't know, you said you had a second item?
Well, I got 2 pieces. Maybe this.
Oh, it may be the same thing. Same thing.
Same? Okay.
Yeah.
What's the
So
next
that's
one?
just for reference.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Okay, I will now read the procedure for this evening's meetings. After the legal notice of each conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision plan is read by the chair, the board will determine if the application is complete and ready for the board to take jurisdiction. The public hearing will begin, at which time the applicant or representative will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. They shall speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations. The board will then have an opportunity to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or staff. The chair will then ask for testimony from the audience. First, anyone wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan may speak. Please come forward to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. This will be the time to express your concerns or ask questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, testimony will come from anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan. The applicant will then be given a rebuttal period, at which time they should respond to any concerns raised by prior public testimony. One public member will be allowed to respond to only those items brought forth during the applicant's rebuttal period. After this has been completed, the public hearing will end and the board will resume the public meeting, at which time the board will deliberate and vote on the application before us. We ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject at hand and to not repeat what has already been said. We want to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and considering all applicable approval criteria established in the Nashua Revised Ordinances. Thank you for your interest and courteous attention. I ask that you please turn off your cell phones at this time. Old business conditional special use permits, none. Old business subdivision plans, none. Old business site plans, case number 1 is tabled to a date in the future to be redetermined. New business conditional special use permits, none. New business subdivision plans, none. New business site plans. Judith M. Walker and Deborah E. Howe and Crimson Properties LLC owners. Springs 1 LLC applicant. Application and acceptance of proposed 41-unit housing for older persons. Properties located at 699 and 701 West Hollis Street. Sheet F, lots 59 and 423, zoned suburban residence. And this project is located in Ward 5. As to new business case number 2, can I have a motion this application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Kelly, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Leclerc. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Jim Petropoulos. I'm a civil engineer at Hayner Swanson, doing business at 3 Congress Street in Nashua, New Hampshire. Tonight, representing Springs 1 LLC. With me tonight is Randy Trammell from Springs 1 LLC, and our project attorney is Brad Westgate, I'm sorry, with Weiner and Bennett. As just read into the record, we are seeking a site plan approval for a housing for older persons project to be known as the Springs, to be located on a property in West Hollis Street in southwest Nashua. What I'm going to try to do tonight is present the facts of the case, and then either Brad or myself or Randy will answer any questions you might have regarding the project. With regard to location, there are 2 lots involved in this application, 699 and 701 West Hollis Street. And of course, West Hollis Street runs all the way from Main Street to the Hollis Town line. We're talking about the section of West Hollis Street west of the F.E. Everett Turnpike. I brought with me an aerial photo tonight, which is up on the board. It's also up on the screens, I believe. This site is highlighted in a yellow border. And the property is abutted by the Nashua River, directly to the north. The AHEPA, Greek Elderly Housing Facility, just to the east. West Hollis Street to the south. And then to the west are 2 housing developments, a 6-lot subdivision known as Lowther Place, and then a single-family detached condominium project known as Hollis Landing. And as I'm sure most everybody who's familiar with West Hollis Street knows, that this part of Nashua has a myriad, really, of housing products, from PRDs to conservation subdivisions, to assisted living, to elderly, to manufactured housing, to single-family homes. So this stretch of road has a real diverse product of housing. The site we're talking about this evening measures 4.85 acres in size and is in the R9 residential zoning district. Now, as you can tell by the map, we have a thin, narrow lot. This lot measures about 150 feet in width and about 1,400 feet in length. And just as a comparable, 150 feet of width is about the width of a football field. The property currently contains 2 home sites and several other outbuildings on the property. The majority of the site is wooded. The front part of the site is relatively flat, and then it kind of moderately grades down to a low point in the middle of the site. and then the topography raises up gently as you get closer to the river, and then falls down to the riverbank. Test pits were performed on the property. Sandy soils, which is the norm for this part of Nashua, were found. A small part of the lot contains a wetland and the edge of this little pond here, this isolated pond that's primarily on the AHEPA property. That pond carries with it a 40-foot wetland buffer, and of course the Nashua River carries with it a 75-foot buffer as well. Now, what is being proposed here tonight, Tom, if you can switch the sheet, is a housing for older persons project. Our client had several options on how to develop this uniquely shaped property. One option was a conservation subdivision. One option was also to double-side the property with a center road and have units on both sides. I'll present that plan a little later as it kind of pushed the units well out into the abutting property lines. But what was agreed to by our client and what was supported by our client's need to provide elderly housing here in Nashua is a elderly housing project, again known as the Springs, with 31 total units. The Nashua Land Use Code allows 38 units to be built upon the property. We're 7 units less. The project will be restricted to persons of 62 years and older. So I'd like to walk through some of the elements of the project. First and foremost, it consists of consolidating the 2 lots that I mentioned that exist to make up the property. The existing home sites and buildings on the property in the front part will be demolished and removed. It is being proposed to construct a private road known as Scenic Drive, which will essentially hug the east part of the property. It'll have a little bit of bend in it to avoid the wetland that I mentioned earlier, and then an end back in the northern part of the property. A 28-foot wide road with a 5-foot sidewalk along one side. Now, we try to site the road along the easterly property line, along the AHEPA property line. And we did that to provide more room along our westerly property line. And you can tell by the plan here, we've cited some of the abutting property homes. On Lowther Place, there are 3 home sites. Those home sites range in setback about 18 to 27 feet from our property line. The units we're proposing are approximately 30 to 35 feet of setback in that location. Moving north towards Hollis Landing, you can see the smattering of their single-family detached condominiums, and they range in size on the setbacks from about 22 to 40 feet in those particular units right there. Our units continue the 30 to 35 feet, with the exception of several units right in here. Our clubhouse building, a duplex, and you can see the corner of this unit here. And the reason being is the wow in the road to avoid the wetland buffer kind of pushed us closer to the Hollis Landing property line. And the reason I bring up those setbacks is because I want you to kind of understand how we went about this long, narrow, thin piece of property and what we thought was important. And what we thought was important was to try to protect setbacks along the easterly property line. This private roadway measures 750 feet. We are requesting, Mr. Chairman, a waiver of that length, and I'll speak to that in a moment. All utilities in the private street are underground, telephone, electric. There'll be new lighting and landscaping for the project. A private sewer pump station will service this development. With regard to stormwater, we are using a twofold approach. First of all, we're capturing, as we do with many projects in sandy soils, we want to take advantage of that good permeable soil. We are capturing rooftops in infiltration units, both in the front of the units and in the back of the units to promote point source recharge. Secondly, we're capturing the roadway in a system of curbing and catch basins, and we're doing an underground recharge system right here in the site. We've got good soils in that location. The ultimate discharge is to the north, to our wetland in the associated pond. So we're providing good qualitative treatment. Hollis Landing, right next to us, if you look at the aerial, their main body of drainage goes to the river, but they do have some drainage course that works through our property, works through their property, then ultimately onto ours and into this pond as well. We're providing a pipe right there to continue to carry that flow to that pond. And so we're trying to maintain natural drainage patterns. Traffic, we prepared a traffic study in support of this particular application. The report didn't meet the threshold of needing a full study. As we know, West Hollis Street is a through road through Nashua. It carries approximately 17,000 cars per day. And as you know, we measure traffic during the morning rush hour or the morning peak hour and the afternoon peak hour. Being a 62-plus-year-old elderly community, they're not big traffic producers. In the morning peak hour, the traffic study is estimating 6 trips per hour entering onto West Hollis Street, or one about every 10 minutes. In the PM peak, it's 9 trips during that peak hour. We'll go out to West Hollis Street, or one about every 6.5 minutes. The project is fortunate in West Hollis Street to have that center turn lane. That allows for a safe left turn into the project. And while it's not designed to help the left turn out of projects, it generally does for those properties, as people are able to find a break in the traffic, make the left, kind of get a little safe haven in the center turn lane before they merge into the eastbound lanes. We have a couple slides on the architecture of the building. I'd like to walk through quickly. The project proposes to be a condominium form of ownership with our client, Spring Ones LLC, initially owning and renting the units. It is a townhouse-style building, 1 story in height, 22 feet to the peaked portion of the roof, so it's a very low-profile unit. The unit composition will be 1 3-unit building, 2 2-unit buildings, and 6 4-unit buildings. Each unit measures 1,000 square feet in size. It will have 2 bedrooms and a basement. Each unit will have a 1-car garage plus a driveway. Behind the units will either be a small deck, patio, or 3-season porch for the units. As you can see on the elevation, pitched roof, vinyl siding in a kind of a New England fashion. The hope would be, Mr. Chairman, with support, the hope would be to begin construction in late fall of 2017. Our application did include 1 waiver request, and I'd like to speak to that. Section 19208E -2 is a waiver of the length of a dead-end street. The Nashua Land Use Code allows for roadway extensions by waiver in excess of 750 feet. One of the first things we did with this project is meet with the fire department. Explain to them the nature of the project, explain to them the long, thin, narrow lot that we have, and that we hoped to exceed the 750-foot limit. The fire department worked with us. They asked to incorporate 2 T-type turnarounds. There's one at the 750 mark here, and that there's one at the end of the project here. In case they ever had an apparatus go down that street, there was ample opportunity for them to back up and maneuver out of there. Of course, they'd be parked with no parking fire lane signs. And those hammerheads are very similar to Lowther Place. Right next door, that 6-lot subdivision I mentioned has a kind of a hammerhead turnaround at the end of its road. The other thing the fire department requested was that each individual unit in this project be fully sprinklered. And I think that's important. That's not currently a code here in Nashua. A building like this normally would not require a sprinkler system. But the fire department requested it, and our client agreed to do it, so each unit will have its own fire suppression system in it. And with those 2 pieces, we were able to get the support of the fire department, and I believe they communicated a letter as part of their review of the project in support of the project and in support of our waiver request. I'd like to end, Mr. Chairman, by explaining or trying to reinforce that what we've tried to demonstrate with the application is that the design has taken into consideration the topography of the property, the shape of the property, the abutting conditions, the wetlands. Anytime you develop the last piece of a site in a neighborhood, it's always difficult, because the people have enjoyed the fact that the site has been wooded for many years. We understand that. Mr. Chamel has reached out to a number of abutters at Lowther Place. We had a discussion with the folks from AHEPA, and I think he also reached out to the folks in Hollis Landing as well. The conditions and the stipulations in the staff report are acceptable. We believe the application is complete and conforms to the Housing for Older Persons regulations. We seek your approval tonight, and with that, I would be glad to answer any questions the board may have, or the public may have.
Thank you. I did have a question about, there was a memo that we had in our package from Carter Falk, and this was dated back in June, and he was just pointing out that there was a very, that the required open space and the provided open space were very close, and he had some questions about whether there were potentially features on the plan that would count against that open space. I'm just wondering if you could address that issue, and I'm assuming that's captured in the plan that's here before us tonight, but I just
Sure.
want, if you could touch on that.
50% open space is required for an elderly housing project in an R9 zone. We happen to be 50.3, which is very close. We've prepared a computer-generated drawing that computes the open space areas and provided it to Mr. Falk. We haven't had a follow-up discussion with him to debate the merits of what's in and what's out, but essentially everything that's green is open space, so I think we're there. If he were to say to me that you need to find 1,000 square feet, I think there's ample opportunities to cut pavement to do that. So I stand before you tonight saying that the plan we submitted was compliant, and that I think if Mr. Falk wanted to challenge us on small items, and we took everything out, paved surfaces, sidewalks, roofs, driveways, other structures that were in grassed areas that wouldn't be considered open space, so we'll have a compliant plan, yes.
Great, thank you. And then I just had one other minor question. Unit 23, there's a, I don't know if it's a bulkhead or if it's a deck or what it is, but it's on the first plan we have here. I just couldn't tell, it looks like it could potentially be encroaching in the setback. I'm assuming that's just, maybe just because of the scale and you can't tell, but I just wanted to confirm.
Correct, yeah. So in the R9 zone, given the geometry of this property, that is technically a side lot line. It is a 10-foot side yard setback. And so the units would comply with that setback. We understood, though, it is the back of the Lowther Place units and the back of the Hollis Landing units. And that's why I described the setbacks before, because we were trying to get more than just 10 feet. Tom, if you can call up a plan. We did prepare, one of the concepts here was to prepare lot units on two sides. And that was this plan here, if you look at your screen. You'll notice the center turn, the road in the center and units on both sides. That plan did push all the units right to the side lot line. And our client did not think that was acceptable, especially to the property line to the west. And so we came back to where we are today, with I think 24 of the 31 units having in excess of 30 feet of setback to that sideline.
Yeah, and just to confirm that, but there's nothing encroaching into the setback.
Correct, yeah,
Okay,
no
yeah.
encroachment, correct.
Other questions from the board? Mr. Leclerc?
Yeah, Jim, can you describe sort of trash handling and plowing and the intent of how that's being done?
Everything can be done under private, under private management, snow plowing and trash removal. Snow plowing, obviously with the road, we were able to cast to the east, okay, for the main road. Obviously, the driveways will have to either back blade out or hand shovel out and kind of get cast to the east. As I say with most projects here in New England, if we have those incredible winters where there's so much snow, they've got to get in a dump truck and haul it out. But I think we've got ample opportunity on one side. We've got We've got a wonderful 10-foot shoulder beyond the sidewalk here. Obviously, we don't want to dump into the wetland, but we've got opportunities along the side of the road to cast that snow off in that direction. Trash removal, I understand, is not a dumpster, it's individual units. We'll put out their trash and a private party will pick that up as well. So everything is private.
And then, generators, is there a generator on the site?
No.
No generator? Okay, 'cause I thought
Oh,
I
there'll
saw
be a generator for the sewer pump
Just
station.
for the sewage pump
Yes.
station? That's it?
Yes.
And then,
So if power goes down, they can still operate
the
their,
sewer lift station? Yep.
yes.
Yeah. And then there was a discussion in the recommended stipulations about the easement for the pedestrian
Sure.
and trail access along the Nashua River. Can you explain what the intent is
Sure.
there?
I believe the intent has been to try to collect easements along the river from property as they develop. I know when we represented a HEPA, we provided a conservation easement. I may be wrong, but I think there's also one for Hollis Landing as well. And I think the intent was that at some day, emanating from the trailhead that is Mine Falls Park, that there could be a trail along the Nashua River headed west. That has been discussed with our client. Our client would be amenable to that type of easement to contribute for people passing along the river. They would like a little clarification. What they wouldn't want to do is provide an easement such that people could drive down Scenic Drive, park, go out, go fishing, go have a picnic on this piece of property here. So, you know, through access is fine. You know, they would be more than willing to grant that, but anything kind of beyond that, I think, would be a little much.
Yeah, okay. Is there intent for parking on that street or on the private street? Is there an intent for parking?
No
along-
designated parking, it's 28 feet in width. Each car has a garage and a driveway. There are a couple parking spaces for the clubhouse building. There's also a little central mailbox here, up
Yeah.
here. But it's wide enough that they could park on the side of the street if somebody had a guest over or something, yeah.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Mr. Robbins?
Mr. Petropoulos, could you explain the setback situation and how, if I understand this correctly, when there is a street coming off, the setbacks are still set from, figured from West Hollis Street, the side setbacks, so that what appear to be backyards are in fact side setbacks?
That's correct. This is.
Could you explain how that works
Sure.
for folks in the audience?
Sure. This is currently, well, it's currently 2 lots, but we're consolidating to 1 lot. This will currently be one lot. There are the Nashua Land Use Code identifies minimum setbacks lines, so people aren't building a large house right on the property line. On this particular property, if I was standing on West Hollis Street looking at this property, I would have a front yard setback here of, I believe, 25 feet in the R9 zone. I would have a side yard setback along the easterly property line and the westerly property line of 10 feet, and I would have a rear yard setback here of 30 feet along the back. That's for a single lot. Now, being a condominium form of ownership, we are remaining a single lot. If Scenic Drive was a public road, then you would have a front yard setback along Scenic Drive, and then this would become a rear yard setback. And so, as I mentioned in the presentation, it is by right and by code a 10-foot, it is a side yard setback for this project. We have tried to be sensitive to that with the positioning of these units with regard to our neighboring properties here. And again, we've done pretty darn well being in excess of 30 feet. We have this little wow here where we get a little closer because we're trying to avoid the wetland buffer located in that particular location.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Mr. Robert?
John, you have proposed retaining walls,
We do.
okay, private road, drainage system. On a lot of private roads, we've had problems with. And what I would like to have is your engineer not only sign off on when he's doing it, but when it's completed, the retaining wall, the road system, that he signs off that it's done to what he's done. Is that possible?
Well, you're kind of asking a larger question, and it's probably a question that can be asked of any project in Nashua.
Usually what happens is the engineer signs off on he develops it, but then he has the contractor comes in and doesn't build it exactly to his spec. And,
That's not how it works in Nashua.
well, I would hope, but I'm just saying, your engineer, the company, whoever's doing it, it's just signing off after its project is done. When I was working down in Boston, we would have
Sure.
an engineer not only sign it off, but the architect would have an independent company come in and sign off that that's done properly.
We do that also on other projects in other communities.
Okay.
But
Well, that's-
that's not the case here now. Often the city requires an as-built survey of a particular project. They haven't asked for that here, but let me during break consult with my client and talk a little bit about that, and I'll respond when I respond later. I think you're asking us to do a little bit more than what's normally done here in Nashua.
Yeah, it's also, I know you guys, you guys probably wouldn't be doing that, but condominiums go in, and
Yeah.
then the road deteriorates, and
Yeah.
the condominium association is left with these roads. So that's the purpose of signing off,
I understand,
okay? Is the maintenance and the stormwater management going to be part of the condo association, part of their agreement?
Yes.
Okay. Is the property in a flood zone?
No.
And you stated on-street parking. With on-street parking, will the fire department be able to drive down the road even though there's on-street parking?
Yeah, I mean, that was part and parcel of the initial discussions with the fire department. If in fact we wanted to go with narrower roads, they said you've got to build more parking because they don't want parking on the narrower roads. So we went with 28 feet. I was not at the meeting, but I think it was clearly indicated that there would be on-street parking at times,
Yeah.
and there was ample room. A vehicle is no more than 8 feet wide, so it should leave 20 feet of width there.
Okay. With elderly housing, I believe, I'm not positive, that there's supposed to be services for that. What services would you be providing for the elderly?
Mr. Weber, I'm going to let Attorney Brad Westgate answer that question in a minute. I'll let him
Okay.
speak to
That ends my
questions
question.
regarding the provisions of the elderly project, sure.
Thank you.
And Mr. Weber, in the meantime, there's also a letter
Oh.
in our packet that addresses that too, if you just want to look at that, take a look at that before Attorney Westgate comes up to speak. Mr. Rapucci?
Mr. Petropoulos, the green indentation there is actually, that's the 40-foot buffer, right? That's not
Correct.
actually wetland.
Correct.
Okay. So, from an engineering point of view, if you got a variance to make that road go straight through the buffer, at the end of the day, would there be any negative impact to the wetland area if that road were straight? And I'm asking you that because I'm looking at it like, it seems like that's causing those, what are really rear yard setbacks, what are technically side yard setbacks, to be really tight there. If that road was straight, then those other properties would have the benefit of the same setback as the other ones do. So I'm just curious, is it because you don't want to go through the extra burden of getting zoning relief on going into the buffer, or what's the logic?
Yeah,
behind
I
it?
think the intent was to do the best we can to not rely on any relief from zoning, not rely on any relief from the Conservation Commission, And in fact, we've done pretty good to bring you forth a project really with one waiver, you know, so I believe that was the case. We saw an opportunity to avoid it. One of the first questions that's asked by the commission and by the zoning board is, can you avoid this? And it would be a hard question to answer by saying, no, we couldn't avoid it.
Right,
I understand your point. You straighten this out, it provides a little bit more distance between the backs of those three buildings. I get that.
I know, but my real question is, at the end of the day, if you were to make that road straight, would there be any harm to the area? Is this just a rules thing, or would you be able to say, if you were to get that relief and allow the road to go through that setback, there would be negative impact on the wetland or anything around there?
Well, it's a very subjective question. You know, you're asking me, I could answer it one way,
What's
but-
your opinion is what I'm asking.
Well, it would be a buffer impact. It necessarily wouldn't be a wetland impact, and we see buffer impacts quite often.
Fair enough, thank you.
Steve?
First, thank you. Just wanted to weigh in on that last point. To me, a buffer impact is a wetland impact. I mean, there's value to protecting the buffers. So. Anyway, my question, Jim, had to do with, you said that you have agreed with the stipulations in the packet. And the first one, Mr. Leclerc asked about, it's actually number 4 here, has to do with the easement. Stated as it is in the list here, it's not really clear. I think we can work on that if this is approved, to make that, more distinct as to what you'll be providing.
I would concur with that.
Okay. And the other stipulation is number 2, has to do with comments from Engineer Walker. And we actually got an update tonight, dated August 4th. It has five items. And they're pretty much questions to be answered. So, I don't know if we have your concurrence on providing acceptable answers.
I do not believe that addressing Assistant Engineer Gene Walker's comments will be difficult to do.
Okay.
So we could live with the condition that we could satisfy Engineer Walker. That would be fine.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
You had, Jim, you had mentioned earlier it's going to be town water, town sewage.
Yes.
How about accessing that? Do you have to cut into the road, and that was recently paved?
Yes.
Is that
So
going to impact your schedule?
So in anticipation of the road being paved, was it last year or this year?
Last year.
Last year. In anticipation, much like several other projects, Mr. Kelly, along the route, our client put upfront money to extend sewer, water, gas, and utilities in a curb cut rounding out of the pavement, so that will not be disturbed. Okay? Now, there is a minor sidewalk connection that needs to be made, and the city engineer has asked for us, once the moratorium on West Hollis Street is done, to come back in 3 years or 4 years and abandon one of the water services to the existing house. We couldn't shut it off because the people still live there. Abandon the water service at the main, and our clients agreed to do that at that time. So to answer your question, we knew it was coming. We got out of the way like the other projects did to anticipate that, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Petropoulos at this point? Did you want to have Attorney
Okay.
Westgate come up at this point, just to address?
Sure, that would be appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Better for me and others, I suspect. My name's Brad Westgate, Mr. Chairman. I'm a lawyer with Weiner and Bennett, 111 Concord Street in Nashua, representing the applicant. I'd like to address a number of things and try not to be too lengthy in my presentation. First, would like to just touch on the project's compatibility with the amended Housing for Older Persons Ordinance. The Board of Aldermen this past March adopted amendments to the Housing for Older Persons Ordinance. It was an effort undertaken by the Board of Aldermen, I think after considerable thought and effort by them, and also by a lot of input from the Aldermanic Planning and Economic Development Committee, and input from this planning board as well. There were a number of public hearings held by both the committee, this board, also presentations and discussions at the aldermanic meetings themselves prior to that adoption. Mr. Trammell and I appeared, I think, at virtually every one of those meetings. In essence, what happened was the initial amendments, proposed amendments to the ordinance were prepared by Attorney Bolton, Corporation Counsel. He submitted drafts to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. They were discussed at the meetings. I reviewed them, had some comments, made some proposed changes to the language, presented my changes and thoughts to the committee and to Attorney Bolton. Sort of a combined effort resulted in the final version of the amended ordinance that the Board of Aldermen passed this past March. I think everyone involved was frankly fairly pleased with the interaction that occurred, the thought that went into it, and I was certainly appreciative of the committee's efforts and their openness to interact with us on the ideas. With that in mind, this project has been designed, and it meets the criteria of that ordinance. As Jim Petropoulos said, first of all, it's a 62 and older community, not a 55 and older community. Those are two possible approaches to take under the state law that allows for housing for older persons, which dovetails into the amended Housing for Older Persons ordinance that the city has adopted. So in this project, everyone must be 62 or older. Nobody can be under 62. In the 55 and older projects, only one person need be 55 or older. After that, any age of residence is permitted. And also in a 55-plus project, up to 20 of the units don't have any age constraint whatsoever. On July 18th, I wrote a letter to Mr. Houston indicating that the applicant was going to go the 62 and older route, explain why it meets that criteria, and also explain that the significant facilities and services component of the Housing for Older Persons ordinance doesn't apply in the 62 and older setting. I gather Attorney Bolton reviewed my letter, and I think there's an email in your packet to the effect that he agrees with the opinion that I set forth. Really, it's direct conclusions by reading both the statute and the regulations. The history of the significant facilities and services, again, only applying in the 55 and older setting, it emanates from regulations that the State Human Rights Commission adopted almost 20 years ago, I want to say, when the 55 and older and 62 and older projects were first before the towns and cities. And if you take a look at those regulations, which have since sunsetted, they're no longer in effect, you can see indelibly clear that this facilities and services package only applies in the 55 and older setting. It's very clear from reading the statute anyway, as it outlined in my letter. It's also quite clear from the code, that is the amended ordinance that the Board of Aldermen adopted. But it's stark in the Human Rights Commission regulations. And the reason they're important is that the list of facilities and services in your ordinance now was taken directly from the sunsetted Human Rights Commission regulations. Just to leave no stone unturned on that, I'm going to pass out, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that old, now sunsetted regulation, and I'll show you what I mean as to how the facilities and services piece only applies in the 55 and older setting. I can explain it in 30 seconds once you see it. So again, I'm sort of submitting this just so for the record you see how we got to where we got today in our ordinance that the city has adopted. And what I've highlighted is, again, this is a sunsetted regulation, but the first section I highlighted is the allowance, if you will, for 62 and older units. And this is the state's regulation, in a way implementing the statute that allows 62 and 55 and older communities. The second area highlighted talks about the 55 or over housing. And you can see in there that if you get a couple paragraphs in, right to the bottom of that first page, you'll see the tie into significant services and facilities. And then it lists the 12 enumerated examples going on to the next page. So obviously, the Human Rights Commission, when it adopted its regulations, knew the distinction between 62 plus and 55 plus and concluded logically and quite simply based on the statute that 62 plus doesn't need facilities and services like 55 and older does. So again, talking a little further about the compatibility of this project to the ordinance. Jim has detailed to you the nature of this site, the nature of what's being designed, the sort of low-rise nature of the units, the fact that most are set back 30-plus feet from the Lothar Place and Hollis Landing side yard. We need no variances for the project. The use is permitted by right in this zone. This use, I think, provides a pretty nice transition from the AHEPA property, which has, it's obviously one multi-unit building, transitioning across where the Scenic Drive road is to be placed, coming into the smaller packets of several few-unit buildings, and then over to the single-family, either detached condominiums or homes on Lothar Place and Hollis Landing. So the design of this, I think, fits in that context pretty well. The units, of course, meet all the dimensional requirements, the setback requirements noted. Again, the height of the buildings is not significant. When you go to the ordinance itself, our newly adopted amended Housing for Older Persons ordinance, you'll see the criteria that talk about building massing, site characteristics, and the like, the idea of keeping, of not adversely impacting view sheds of neighboring properties, that sort of thing. I think that happens in this case. We do acknowledge those by way of the low height in the building and the setback from the residential properties to the side. Also, Scenic Drive itself gets sheltered somewhat from the residential properties by being on the easterly side of the property, not the westerly side of Hollis Landing and Lothar Place. Jim has explained how the topographic characteristics of this property lend itself to the well-designed single-sided developed road, if you will, given the nature of the site relatively flat into the beginning sections. I think your packet may have, Mr. Chairman, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are a few letters from Lothar Place residents that are
That's correct.
that are in support or non-objection to the project, and I think that gives some indication of their acceptance of the idea of how setbacks are being treated, how the nature of the units are being proposed, given the size of modest size that the units must require. You may know that under the Housing for Older Persons ordinance, the units can't exceed 1,000 square feet in size. Also under that ordinance, we have to have at least 31 units if we're new development. We propose 31 units. There's still a section in the ordinance that talks about redevelopment of properties in which 10 or greater units are permitted, greater than 10 units are permitted, but we've avoided that debate because 31 units can fit here. They are less than the overall permitted density, and the design works well. And lastly, the geography, that is the location of this property, is also commensurate with what the ordinance contemplated. We're in an area that's got a mix of uses on West Hollis Street, two of which are senior housing facilities, Nashua Crossing across the way a short distance, and of course immediately adjacent to the AHEPA property. So we're not out of character, if you will, with the type of housing that's in the area and the sort of nature of the mixed uses that are present in this part of the city. Happy to answer any questions as well, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate your time.
Attorney Westgate, I had a quick question. You mentioned density. There's the continued reference in the revised ordinance to the density allowance in table 42.2, which I understand is greater than would otherwise be permitted. Do you know if this project takes advantage of the density allowances in that table?
I'm looking to Jim, and Tom, but I'm pretty sure it must. I'd have to look up the regular density for the R9 district in the regulation, but Jim, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, the question?
Sure, so Jim, I was just asking if there's the density allowances in the new ordinance, which are continuation from the existing ordinance. There's the table 42.2. I just wanted to confirm whether this project was taking advantage of those density allowances.
Yes, 8 units per acre, that's correct.
Okay.
In the R9 zone, yes.
Okay, thank you. So then I just had one additional follow-up question for Attorney Westgate. So I just want to get your opinion on this, given all the background research you've done and your involvement in the revisions of the ordinance. There's a provision, it's in section C2 of the current ordinance, which says, in order to qualify as housing for persons 55 years and older, under 354A 15.4, and obtain the density allowance set forth in table 42.2 below, and then it goes on to talk about the significant facilities and services. So I just want to confirm that, would it be your opinion that the reference to the density allowance there is specific to the 55
Yes,
and over housing?
yes, absolutely.
So that you would make the same argument in terms of the density bonus in the distinction between 55 and over and 62 and over?
Yeah, I think that the intent of this section that you've just noted, C2 in the ordinance, is that the facilities and services, the 12 that are listed, are only required to be provided in the 55 and older setting if you seek the density bonus. The 62 and older setting doesn't require the facilities and services to get the density bonus because, by definition, 62 and older is one of the types of housing for older persons allowed under the ordinance. And then if you go to the density table, you just simply read off the various density provisions in the zone, table 42-2, and 8 per unit of duplex and 8 per acre for a duplex design, 8 per acre for multifamily design, applies whether it's 62 or 55, 55 having the additional requirement to provide facilities and services to get there, 62 not, totally consistent with state and federal law.
Right, so a 55 and older project, if it was not seeking the density bonus, your view would be then it would not have to provide those significant services?
It wouldn't under the code. Frankly, it still would under the state law.
Under state law, okay.
So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Other questions? Mr. Clark?
Yeah, did you address, or could you address, there's the provision for the 25 square foot per dwelling of common space. Can you talk to how you meet that requirement?
It's certainly a requirement, and
Yeah.
it's satisfied by the building of the clubhouse.
Okay.
Jim can tell us what the square footage of the clubhouse is, but it was built to meet 25 times 31. 900 square feet, Jim is saying.
Okay. And then in regard to the, I guess it's 12 or whatever services, are any of those being provided?
I'm sorry, any?
Are any of those intended to be provided?
No, not on a mandated basis. There's certainly, well, I've had a fair amount of experience with these kind of communities over 20 years of doing them in various towns, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least that the residents sort of organically, as you say today, develop a sort of social and perhaps educational, informational body of ideas and thoughts and implementation of programs on their own, frankly. That wouldn't surprise me in the least. It also tends to be that the average age in these places isn't always, is never 62 or never 55. It's always beyond a bit. And beyond a bit means you have more retired people means you have more interest in that sort of activity. But it would be too difficult to try to mandate it in the context of this setting without being required to. Is it catches us fish nor fowl, I think.
Yeah, my question wasn't about mandate, it was really just, as the project is currently being presented, is there any intent?
The developers have talked about it, frankly, because it may help marketing, very honestly.
I'm all set.
And they both, by the way, the developers have had experience in 55-plus communities, so they've done this before.
Mr. Robbins?
Mr. Westgate, thank you for being here tonight. I'm interested in the, for want of a better term, the policing of the age 62. And also, what does the term solely occupied by mean? And who polices this?
Yeah. Well, it's policed primarily in one way, but it can be policed in a couple different ways. First of all, solely occupied by, to me, means no one living there can be under 62. Only people 62 plus can live there. Okay? Case closed, literally no exception. You may notice, it's interesting, in the human rights regulations, they had an exception for employees of a complex, but that's not going to be the setting we have here. And frankly, I wouldn't want to do it that way because I wouldn't want to even run possibly afoul of the code, this regulation and the statutory regulation that also applies. The policing is typically done at sort of two steps. First is an affidavit with backup data that's obtained from a buyer at closing or a tenant if he comes into rent, proving he or she is 65 or older, 62 or older. So you get data from the person when they either buy or when they come in as a tenant. Annually, in a condominium setting, the association is supposed to do a census and get sort of re-upping, if you will, the age data of the people living there. What happens there have been a few occasions of the projects I've been involved in which people have abused it. I have not seen any, I shouldn't say that. There is one 62-plus setting, and I know there's an issue. But in 20 years, it hasn't been too many that have brought up. But what happens is a neighbor finds out. A neighbor sees someone who clearly looks not 62 years old, tells the board, and then frankly, it's the board's obligation to deal with it.
When you say the board, you
Meaning
mean,
the board of the condominium association, for example.
so that, do I understand that the condominium board is legally responsible for enforcing?
It'll be made responsible by the condominium document I prepare. Every one of these I've done, I've mandated that the board enforce the 62 or the 55 provisions.
And what happens if the board doesn't?
Then the person who's concerned, say the neighbor who complains, can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission can investigate it. They can find out from the board what's going on. And frankly, if it's egregious, indicate to the board that they're violating the very principles upon which the project was permitted, which is a pretty stiff risk to take. Because we would respectfully hope that you will approve this project, but you're approving it based on our representations that it's going to comply with the 62-plus provisions. And we got to create that mechanism of policing. I did, in a couple different projects I did, the town asked to have the enforcement authority as well. And we granted it to them in the condominium documents and the approval. But I honestly, I'm not so sure the municipality wants to have to deal with that, frankly. There are too many things of greater priority.
And one further question, if I owned a unit here and I'm over 62, and my grandchildren come up to spend the summer, and they're here for 3 months, they are under 62, are they occupants?
Yeah. What I've done in that case is create a guest provision in the condominium documents. And typically, what I've written is that guests are not allowed to stay more than 2 weeks, so that we create some line between guest and occupant. And it's not written down any place in the regulations or the statutes that where that line is, or even if there is a line. But to keep the project in compliance, I think creating such a line is a good thing, because frankly, it gives the board something to rely on to not let something get out of hand. So I would recommend we do that in this case.
Well, that was, the question that was coming up for me is, would you recommend that such a provision be put in if you were to write up those regulations?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions for Attorney Westgate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I had one more question for Jim.
Oh, okay. Chair Petropoulos, if you would mind, Mr. Clare had one more question.
Just a quick question on the lighting. Do you have a proposed temperature? We've had, like color. Yeah, I know a few of the newer developments, we've had some issues with the 4,000 Kelvin and higher, with the butters. So generally speaking, I think the city's, what is it?
3,000.
3,000 is the current. We'd
That
like
works for us.
We'd like to see it there, yeah.
I can't tell you what's on the drawings for the photometrics.
It doesn't have the number, so,
Doesn't,
but I'm sure
okay, so
it's
3,000 Kelvin, that's fine. Yep,
Yeah, I'm all set.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to this plan. If so, please come forward, and if you could please just state your name and address for the record.
My name is Robert Lamarck. I live at 32 Norma Drive. I'm at Hollis Landing. Had a few questions primarily concerning the setback. And Mr. Thibodeau, I think, addressed that on the curved road design and the fact that the clubhouse in Unit 22, I think it is, comes 10 feet or less from our property line. It disadvantages a couple of our units.
I'm sorry, if I could just ask you,
I'm
just to
sorry.
speak in the mic, otherwise we won't get it for the record, so.
Sorry. It disadvantages a couple of our units, 31 and 29, because it butts them very closely. The others have a 30-foot setback plus approximately 20 feet of their own backyards, so that puts the units about 50 feet back. But 22 and the clubhouse come within 10 feet of the property line, and probably only another 15 feet from that unit 31 on the corner and 29. And I think that decreases their property values rather significantly. I didn't quite get the answer to Mr. Thibodeau's, Rapucci's question, I'm sorry, about the curve in the road and whether that could be alleviated and maybe push the setback back to the 30-foot setback on that. Was it a matter of regulation to go to?
It could be eliminated, but it would require zoning relief. The zoning requirements would be violated if they go into the 40-foot setback. That would require the applicant to go to the zoning board and get a variance for that. It would also require them to go probably to the Conservation Commission and get permissions for that. So, I mean, the answer that they gave me, I completely understand why they would not want to do this. I was just trying to get the big picture view of it, seeing what you're bringing up as kind of a problem, to see if there might be a solution to that, but.
Yeah, I realize that the clubhouse is also a structure that really doesn't need to exist except for density regulation. Is that correct, or?
That's not to me to say.
There needs to be a certain, it's 25 square feet of common area per unit. So in order to to meet that requirement, they have to have a certain amount of common area, so the clubhouse is serving that purpose. It's,
Wouldn't a bocce ball court do the same thing? I mean, or something like that?
I mean, I don't know whether that would qualify, but there has to be that common area.
Does it have to be a structure?
I don't know the answer to that question. But we can certainly get the answer to that. But that's what the purpose that the clubhouse is serving.
Right, so in other words, it's serving a regulatory function rather than an actual service to that community particularly.
Well, I would imagine the applicant would indicate that it's also serving a function for the community, but it is also serving that regulatory purpose, yes.
Right. Would it be difficult to investigate changing that curve in that road, and how difficult that would be? I mean, it does really affect our property values. I'm not even bringing up the other stuff about the fact that there's going to be disruption to our community by the construction that's going on there. It's going to be very dirty, and they're going to take out probably quite a bit of tree stock down through the back, which is going to eliminate a lot of privacy. May require us to put up some kind of a natural fencing along there, put trees along the edge, some arborvitaes or some other a natural wall to protect us from the encroachment of people from that
Let me ask
association.
you this, would you feel better if the buildings were set up so that it wasn't the clubhouse that was so close, but units that were close? Is there a difference to you?
think
Is it
so.
the
I
fact
think
that
it's-
it's the clubhouse, or is it just a structure?
And I think the clubhouse is frankly less obtrusive than 22.
Right.
The one that's right on the corner, that sort of thing. So I think that's a bigger problem, but the privacy issue coming across. Oh, by the way, there is no easement along the river on any of our deeds for any walkway along the river in our property. So there is no pass-through there that's possible. We're a private, very private community. We like to remain private. We don't like people coming in from other developments. We don't like people coming in from the town using our roads or, recreational facilities. And we have had to have people leave because of use of the tennis court or, our common area. So we'd like to keep it very closed off.
Yeah, I mean, this plan is not proposing the easement other than on the lot that's subject to the plan. So I think there was just, it was a question that was asked about whether there were other easements, but that's not, it wouldn't be, the easement requirement in this plan wouldn't affect
Right.
your condo property.
And eliminating a couple of units isn't possible because of the requirement of 8 units per acre or something like that, or the requirement of 31 units for that size lot.
Well, I mean, it's an allowance. I mean, we can certainly, what we can do is we can ask the applicant to address your questions and concerns, and speak to, the issues you're raising.
Yeah, I mean, it's primarily the setback issue, the privacy issue. We're going to have to somebody is probably going to have to construct a fence, a more adequate fence. We do have a small chain link fence along that property line right now. So either we or somebody else is going to have to bear the burden of a more substantial, structure along there in order to keep privacy, keep our privacy. And, we do pay full tax rate. I don't know if 62 or over is a full tax rate situation or not, or whether that's some kind of a reduced tax rate because of the 62 and over type of thing. But, we pay a lot of money for taxes. We don't take any services much from the city. We don't have many children, maybe 2 or 3 that have ever attended Nashua schools. So we're kind of been, paying asset. And we do have traffic issues. We do have issues with people going to the landfill down West Hollis Street and trash along the roads. Trying to get in and out of the property is a problem in the morning, not so much at night, but trying to get out when school is going into the high school. That light that comes out from the high school is very slow on West Hollis. and allows a lot of time for egress from Public Works, High School, Stello Stadium areas. And I can understand that too, because that's a timing issue. You know, there are times when that needs to happen, but that light doesn't have to be set that way all the time. So, and, you know, it's just a big issue as far as traffic is concerned. And I don't anticipate 31 more units adding a lot to that, except that there will be more cars coming in and out. Just every little drop adds another little problem to the traffic issue on that road. But, you know, but anyway, let's see if I have anything else. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, by the way, happy about the height of the buildings. We thought there were 2 stories. 1 story, 22 feet is a good thing as far as we're concerned, because that keeps the level down and we don't have someone overshadowing our buildings. But again, the setback is the only thing I would like to look into more. Okay?
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Just because you're probably more familiar with your development. The houses in the development that you live in, that abut to this area, the 22 and the clubhouse, are there any trees on that property?
On our side of the property?
Yeah.
There are a few, but the majority are in the developed area, the area to be developed.
So it's mostly cleared on your property?
Mostly, around, there's a little pond next to 31, which is right behind the clubhouse. And that area does have tree stock in it, and there is some privacy there. So it's more that those last couple of units, 29 and 31, where it comes closer.
Yeah. Okay.
Just the last units before the break there.
All right. Thanks.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? If you'd like to speak, please come forward.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm John Douglas Trotter, 65 Norma Drive, Nashua, New Hampshire, resident of Hollis Landing. And I'll be very brief. I've had some interesting and productive conversations with the developer. He was gentleman enough to seek me out yesterday, and we talked for several minutes, and we also had a couple of telecons today. I'm looking for a win-win situation, and I have one concern: water runoff. Now, I looked at your plans back there, and I also heard Mr. Weber hit on a very critical and important facet of verifying that what is said would be done and what was actually done is verified and signed off by people who are qualified to do that. And very simply, we're not getting water from that area now. There shall not be water coming from that area as a result of the produce of a
Sorry, sir.
residential section.
Can I just ask you to speak into the microphone because he can't get you?
Yes, yes. Oh, I wanted to address the principles of that because.
And that's fine. They'll be able to hear you and
Okay.
just fine.
All right, I'll repeat myself. I don't want any water coming from there that isn't coming from there now, bottom line.
Got it.
And I want the design and the build to print and whatever you people mandate inspected and signed off. So that if there is something that goes wrong and it is discovered that, oh, this thing says this was going to happen and it didn't happen, Who's going to answer for that? Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Does the applicant take the opportunity to come up and address those comments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I took good notes. Thanks, Mr. Lamarck and Mr. Trotter. Mr. Trotter was staring me down there, in case you didn't notice. So Mr. Lamarck's, I think I have his name right, concern are the 2 units in the clubhouse closest to the property. It's a very fair comment. First off, we're not going to go back and redesign the road and go through that permitting effort. What our client will pledge to do is he'll seek to, with staff's permission, reconfigure those 2 units a little bit, make them a little bit less steep, a little bit more squatty to try to pull away. Same thing with the clubhouse. Right now, they're 12 feet to the property line. We'll try to do better than that. And I think a combination of that effort as well as probably some fencing in that location or plantings will provide the buffer. Randy said to me, we want to be good neighbors too. So, Mr. Chairman, we would seek to improve that situation, working with staff, adding some landscaping and some buffering there. Mr. Trotter, runoff, yes, sir. Drainage is always a concern. Your water's coming down onto our property. We're going to take it, we're going to keep it going through there to that pond where it is going today. We do not have any discharge going onto Hollis Landing's property. We've got good swale work right behind the property, making sure anything sheds onto their property. Everything goes into our stormwater management area and then off. So the design is sound. The execution and the inspection is something that is something probably the board and the city needs to tackle. About private sites, I will tell you that all the work will be bonded. I will tell you that the drainage work in this location will need to be inspected by us as part of our alteration of terrain permit. But that's the extent of it today in Nashua that they have. It's a private road. If it were a public road, it would be inspected by the DPW staff for every element along the way. So I think those are the 3 areas, and I'd be glad for any follow-up on those items.
Mr. Weber?
Just to follow up, Jim. Does your architect, to protect the architect, does he have any inspectors to inspect the compaction that is requested or is down on noted? Do they have an inspection, independent testing company that does this to protect the architect?
Yeah, I think you're mixing terms. Architect would be the building. Clearly, all the building systems, structure, foundation, plumbing, electrical, that's all inspected by the city.
Yeah.
So no issue there. I think what you're talking about is the site. Is the road built to spec? Are the utilities built to spec? Is the pump station built to spec? And what I'm saying to you tonight is, unfortunately, that doesn't exist in Nashua. You don't have that requirement. Not for this project, but not for any project.
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
What I'm
So now,
talking
does
about
the
is
owner
for-
go out, does the owner go out and hire an inspector to be his eyes and ears on the project?
Clerk of the Works.
Clerk of the, I don't know that. I don't know if that's what he has done on, Randy has done on other projects here in Nashua. What I do know is the improvements need to be bonded for, okay, so somebody's got to release the bond once that's done. And the drainage here will need to be inspected. That's part of the new alteration of terrain regulations, so. Thank you.
Okay.
Engineer Crane?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, Jim, that the city has been talking about the requiring that these private roads be inspected because by state law, these private roads have to meet the standards the city has set for public streets. And we've been talking about, and, you know, the planners are here and Roger's not, but we've been talking about how do we assure ourselves that these roads are being constructed for standard. And we've had our fair share of private roads failing prematurely, and complaints coming into the city, what have you done, why didn't you help? So it's a fair question. as
It
far as
is.
the Stroud
I can
comes
tell you what
about.
other communities do.
That would be,
That would be, they require the design engineer to, post-construction, submit a letter of compliance that the project's been substantially completed in accordance with the plans.
so I hate to bring that up here as asking
Right.
the applicant to, you know, give us some assurance that something like that can be done. Maybe not to the fullest extent, but maybe to some extent.
Well, I mean, you know, is this something you're gonna ask every applicant before you to
That-
do?
It
You
it
know,
was being discussed.
You know, it's a good idea, I'm not disagreeing with the notion, but, you know, I stand before you here with this case and you say, okay, this is the one we do it on.
We've done it before. We've actually asked other housing units to,
Okay.
because it's a
And I'm
private.
not- And I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying, you know, the rules aren't there yet, so, okay.
Is
It'd be
it
an
a burden?
interesting, it would be an interesting way you word the motion, I'd be interested in that.
How much of a burden is it to you to do
What it
that?
typically requires, is erosion control inspections, which generally are done anyway, they're done weekly, okay? It includes inspections of certain levels of construction, probably roadway subgrade, probably when gravels go down, probably
By
when
city
pavement go down.
engineers?
No, they're asking by the private entity. What's being asked is that our client hires somebody to watch the project get built and at the end submit a letter of compliance saying the project's been built in accordance with the approved design plans. That's really what you're asking.
That's pretty much.
Because this is a private road, so there is no city inspection.
Well, does the city have the ability to inspect it?
No, there's no public improvements here, it's all private. They're trying to ensure a well-built private project.
Clearly, I don't understand this very well, so I'm trying to understand it. When we build a road that's a public road, does the city of Nashua go through a process to make sure that that road meets certain
Absolutely.
criteria?
Absolutely, very rigorous.
Those are city employees that do that,
Correct.
whether it's the engineering or anything.
It is-
Why can't they do that on your road, is what I'm asking.
Okay, and the answer is pretty simple. We don't have the resources to extend into the private roads, not just yet. Maybe if the mayor allows us to hire more staff, we could.
Oh, well, thank you for getting me into the middle of that one.
You started it.
I'm just trying to understand if it's something the city does for regular roads, why we don't do it. If we have a concern that private roads are being built in a substandard way, why aren't we just inspecting them like we inspect other roads?
Again, it comes down to resources.
Gotcha.
And we had started discussions, it's been several months, and we should get together and talk about it. But it was leading to putting some burden back on the applicant to provide that compliance in some fashion.
Gotcha.
But I do have to remind all of us that those rules don't exist today, and the applicant's here with a plan.
Yes.
That's what we're only charged with looking at.
Well, we have required other companies, other applicants to come in and to have a independent, compliant, to have the applicant have that done, so that down the road, the roads are in good shape, are gonna stay in good shape.
I don't off the top of my head recall, maybe there was one case, but I can't recall off the top of my head, but
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into this in discussion, but I mean, there's a benefit on the developer's side to doing it right. I mean, there's road failures, that's gonna be a burden on the condo association. You know, that's gonna come back to them, you know, so, But it's really not a question for the applicant. We should probably take that up during discussion, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
One quick thing, so the area where the curve in the road is there any opportunity to narrow the road?
To go from 28 down to something more narrow through
To
that
24?
stretch,
And,
and then back up to 28 on the other side?
yes.
It's in a little bit of a kind of a wild curve. I'd hate to, we're messing with alignment, I'd hate to mess with the width at the same time. I think we can help get distance by amending the units a little bit and then providing a better buffer with some fencing or some trees.
Just a quick question. There's a sidewalk on that side, too?
No, it's on the east side.
It's on the east side. Okay. Yeah, that's what I mean. On the east side, there's a sidewalk.
Yeah.
And is currently the sidewalk is outside the buffer,
Yes.
too? Is there an opportunity to change the construction of the sidewalk and allow that portion to be in the buffer?
Not without going through the zoning and.
You'd still have to do that?
Yep.
Unless it was just a grass.
Yeah, they would have to go
Okay.
through that.
Yeah, all right, I just wondering, yeah, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
I should have let him answer, I'm sorry.
I'd ask Mr. Lamarck or Mr. Trotter, you had the opportunity to hear the applicant's responses. I'd just give you one more opportunity, if you'd like, to come speak to those responses from the applicant. Just one question, Sure. And again, I know you've already done it, but if you could just identify yourself for the record again.
Robert Lamarck, 32 Norman Drive. I'm on the board at Hollis Landing. But the developer had mentioned changing the setback on the unit 22, 23. Just wondering when he would get back to me or back to us or you with any ideas about making changes that might make that more amenable and how that would actually work. You know, whether it's changing the sidewalk configuration, moving the road over, or angling the building a little differently, what he would propose to do that and when we can find out about that.
I think what we would likely do is if we were going to approve the plan, we would make it a condition of the approval that the applicant, consistent with their intentions, work with the city staff to, change those plans in a way that would create that additional
Yeah, I'm
buffering.
just more interested in the property values of those couple of units. I don't want to see them like really deteriorated because of an 8 or a 10-foot setback in that area.
Right, understood, and I think
Yeah.
what we've heard from the applicant is they're willing to work with that to do some things to increase that setback a little bit and create some additional buffering items, and so we would,
I appreciate that
Yeah.
from them. Just wanted to know, how that would work and when we would hear about it type of
right,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
So, as I said, from our perspective, I think we would make it a condition of the approval, and then they would be obligated to work with the city staff to achieve that.
And would we be notified of that change?
I would hope that the developer would work with the abutters and keep them informed about that process.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mr. Trotter, did you want to respond to the applicant's? Okay? Thank you. Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions for the applicant at this point? Everyone comfortable
Yes.
closing the public hearing?
Yes.
Well, one of the things I raised about is the easement, getting the right language. We probably need to get the applicant's input as to what was satisfactory to them. Because the way it's stated here, it's really not an action item as a condition.
Right. Maybe just Attorney Westgate, would you like to perhaps address that?
Jim outlined the thought, again, Brad Westgate for the record, lawyer for the applicant. Jim Petropoulos outlined the thought, which was, we're fine with the notion of the easement if it's used to connect other easements along Nashua River, as opposed to an easement that people can use by driving into Scenic Drive, parking, and then just going to the river. One approach could be, well, let's step back. It's almost, if they're not connecting easements on all the abutting properties, it becomes academic whether to create it, I suppose. And I gather there's no such easement on Hollis Landing. I suppose one could be created in the future. One approach could be to reserve in the condominium documentation the developer's right, and then to be passed on to the condominium association, the right to grant the easement to the city if a connecting easement, for example, is established at Hollis Landing. That'd be one approach, so that it would trigger a mandatory grant of the easement, and you wouldn't have to get mortgagee banks to sign off and homeowners to sign off, but you would reserve that right in the condominium documents. That would be one approach. Because it could be granted right now, I suppose, but again, it won't really be used, right? It'll be an academic exercise. But it could be done. It could be a condition of approval to grant the easement now for that purpose of connecting to other easements for passage along the Nashua River, but not general passage throughout the project. I'm not sure what the board's preference would be, grant now or reserve the ability to grant and then trigger the grant upon Hollis Landing having an adjacent easement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay. Any other questions, or?
Nope.
Okay. This concludes the public hearing on this application. We will now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. So I will open it up for discussion, comment. Mr. Weber?
Yes, I understand Jim Petropoulos' concern, and until the city comes up with a more adaptive wording and stuff, I don't think it's prudent for us to mandate him when it's not part of the ordinance. So it's one of those things that I've talked with Roger about, and Roger has concerns, the city has concerns. We need to do something about it. But to saddle them with some added expense, they've been around. They're going to stay here. So they're going to continue to do good work. So I don't want to put any stipulations. I don't think it should be put in here at this time until city comes up with, engineering comes up with something that's going to protect the city and the condominium owners.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Rucci?
Yeah, I'm just curious, what are the and this is for Engineer DeCrane, what are the man-hour requirements to do this? I mean, is it a matter of a city engineer stopping by 3 times during the process of building this roadway, or is it more than that? How many man-hours are we talking about for the city to look at it?
Let me start, Mr. Rapucci, by saying our construction season is pretty small in this climate. Everybody understands that. You don't have construction in earnest until you're down to May in the year. You know, April is still, you still have frost in the ground. So then you have all this activity. We have public projects, our own projects. We have the private development projects on the public streets. And so I have inspectors who are trying to hit 20 sites within one day. Think about that, all over the city.
I'm not really asking you that.
No,
I'm
no,
just asking how many man-hours
So-
it takes to do this.
So I'm just saying, think about 20 sites within an 8-hour day. How many hours can you give, you know, to one project and get enough information? It does take a lot for an inspector to stop, check things out, take notes, and he wants to be there during the critical times, let's say putting something in the ground. So all this activity happening at the same time, we can't inspect properly, and you end up with, you know, work that's not acceptable. So they take on.
It's not typical. I mean, I work all over the
Yep.
nation on it too, right? So the majority of the construction control is the design team. It's not the city. So, you know, in more instances of going for construction control, it's gonna, you know, it would typically be the design team that's gonna, and that's another service, if you will, that the owner has to buy from the engineer, so.
That's,
and
you know,
we-
respectfully,
we do-
excuse-
They do buy it in all
Okay,
the other trades.
I get all of that.
Yeah,
That is not my question.
yeah.
It's a simple question. How many man-hours would the city need to expend to perform this function? That's the question. If you can't answer, it's okay.
Well,
But
I was going
on
to.
one hand, we have the city saying we're getting substandard roads, and on the other hand, we're saying we don't have a rule to force the private person to spend the money to do that. So I'm just saying, how much effort would it take for you to do it? That's all I'm asking.
So as you know, construction varies every day.
Yep.
And you don't want to see everything, you want to see the critical things like I mentioned.
Yep.
So sometimes you're required on a day, if you're putting sewer in the ground, all right, you want to be there watching that sewer all the time. So you might want to be there for 4 hours of a day, and you have 20 projects to visit. So that day, you may let that sewer go in the ground without any inspection. The point I was making by saying so many projects for one inspector leads to not adequate hours as it is. So we
Well, I
we
can
don't even
give-
need to know
I
the
can
number.
Yeah, I can give you an average. I mean, in our contracts, it's 20% of the total contract. Like when I get a job and I have construction control, it's 20% that's the typical amount. It's 20% of my fee goes towards the construction control. That's the typical amount.
Jerry?
So you can convert it that way if you want.
Jerry?
That's how we
I-
do it, yeah.
I've been on construction sites from putting it in the ground, and it's always has been much easier for the engineer and the architect to hire out a certified company, because there's hundreds of them that can go out to all these different jobs and do that, and now you have a certified report that this is done.
You know,
So
I-
that's the
I-
easiest thing than
respectfully,
having
I
a-
do understand all that. I've built projects myself, personally, in the city of Nashua. I kind of know what the process is.
Yeah.
Actually, I know it in depth. It's just, the city is on one, it just seems to me like we're saying, on one hand, we're getting substandard product from private developers. We don't have a solution for it.
But this is, the bottom line is, the city's not going to do it here, and we're considering a particular project.
Right, okay.
This is a bigger issue that I think goes beyond the scope of this project. And so, as I said, the city's not gonna do it here. I don't know if they have the authority to do it, even if they had, you know, the
Okay.
man hours available. And, I mean, Mr. Weber's indicated he's not inclined to require the applicant to do something more, and I would tend to agree with him. So I just think we
That's
need
what
to focus.
Yeah.
I think you're raising a legitimate point, and it's something that sounds like it's being discussed within the city already. But I think for purposes of this project, we just had to focus on, you know, what is being done here.
Mr. Chair, let me clear up why this conversation started to come up recently. It has to do with, and if Roger was here, he would explain. The law has been in the books for a long time that private roads have to be constructed per city standard, public street. But that wasn't the case. If you go back, you'd see narrower streets, and there's really no quality control or any of that. So there is a private road that was constructed and then reconstructed, and then more issues and all of that. And Roger got very involved because the city legal, and there's a whole lot of things going on. I wasn't really much, into it, but we got dragged in afterwards. And as they looked more and more into it, they said, well, we should get back and start following as required by law. And that's when the discussion started. So it's not like we've been thinking of this for a very, very long time. It's something that's relatively new within the last year. And that's why it's more and more important. We're recognizing that there is a deficiency. But as we speak, we don't have the resources, and we are working on a plan. It's going slowly to try and figure out how to get this under control.
Okay.
Right.
Mr. Clary.
No, I think the only couple things that came up that you know, if we're gonna amend or add to whatever, some of these stipulations, I mean, the lighting temp, I don't know if we need to add that. I mean, they talked about it, but I guess if we wanna see it at 3,000 Kelvin, we should probably just put it in there. It's a pretty simple stipulation. Sounds like they are amenable to it anyway. The easement, what's people's thoughts on that? I mean, I feel like that's a complicated, I mean, as it's written right now, we're basically just saying that they need to consider it on a voluntary basis.
Can we
Anybody have
have
an
it
issue with what's
just
written?
the applicant work with staff?
I mean, it's kind of what's there. I mean,
Yeah.
I think what's there is,
Yeah.
I mean, the one option, I mean, as Attorney Westgate mentioned, is that we could require that they put it into the condo documents. And as he said, in that instance, you know, it doesn't force them to grant the easement right away if there's no practical basis for it. But if there is then connecting easements in the, you know, for the abutting properties, you know, would then require them to grant the easement. And that way it has sort of the, you know,
Yeah.
you don't have to then deal with it in terms of getting the approvals at that point, but it saves it for when it's, you know, functionally.
do you have some wording you're thinking? Require condo documents?
Required the applicant to include in the condominium documents, an obligation to provide an easement for access along the Nashua River in the event that, you know, similar easements are granted for the, with respect to the abutting properties.
Both abutting properties, not just one, right? So it wouldn't like be at the end of the line. As long as they're on both sides,
I
it
think the end
can.
of the line's okay.
It's like your sidewalks, we require sidewalks to this point until this person, I know it's a dead end, but.
Right, I mean, it's gonna
we can
end
get to there.
somewhere, so I mean, I think as long as there's, I think the bigger issue would actually be was that the east?
Yeah, we could
The-
just say either.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that's, yeah, because if there's access all along up to it.
But not, and he was talking about not on the street, not access from the street,
Correct, just access.
private street.
So we call it cross-access.
Yeah,
May I suggest, because this can get complicated, this came from staff. So as Mr. Weber suggested, if we just have them work with staff, if staff decides to drop it, it'll be fine with us. If staff wants to pursue it, then I'm sure they'll come with something that's amicable to the applicant. Attorney Westgate can suggest at that time, you know, what would be most appropriate, so.
all right, well, maybe we should ask staff, since they drafted the stipulation.
That would be
That'd be
appropriate.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are we thinking wording there? So that the applicant shall work with staff,
To,
I'm inclined to leave it the way it is.
Well, the way it is, doesn't talk about working with staff, it just says the applicant should consider.
All right,
that
since
doesn't
the
hold any
abutting
water.
properties go-
so the applicant will work with staff,
Instead of the owner shall consider, so we should say the owner shall work with staff. Shall work with staff.
grant pedestrian easement.
On granting a pedestrian easement to continue to support this use. So we just remove should consider on a voluntary basis to shall work with staff. 2,
That has no teeth whatsoever. Get rid of the word consider on a voluntary basis and just
yeah, that's
make
what, I
it.
got
That's
rid
what-
of
yeah,
all
that's
that,
what-
yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
saying.
He was suggesting.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it would
so-
read, since the abutting properties and the properties across the Nashua River from this lot contain existing trails and pedestrian access easements, the owners shall work with staff on granting a pedestrian easement to continue to support this use.
And I would just add a pedestrian easement in there, you know, abutting or along the Nashua River, just to,
It
make it
says
clear.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
along the Nashua River.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Does that sound fine?
Yep.
And then what about this, reconfiguration of the, this 22-23 and the clubhouse we talked about?
Is it gonna be at the discretion of the applicant? Right, he's in compliance with everything.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
said that they would work with it. We didn't get any specifics on it, but
Yeah,
what would we say beyond that?
Yeah, I always have an issue with, increasing, you know, like putting a, where, you know, if you say you're gonna increase, you usually gotta say, we're gonna increase to 20 feet. You know, you need something measurable or it doesn't work. But, I also do have a concern always with, you know, lots where there's no trees on anybody's lot until it gets to the next guy's lot, you know? And, yeah, I mean, you could plant trees on the abutter's lot too. I mean, they could, yeah, I feel for that, but it's a complicated scenario when you have a lot, you clear all the trees on your lot, and then your neighbor wants to clear theirs. You know what I mean? It's
Doesn't seem like, to me, it doesn't seem
a
like anything we
planning
should touch.
board issue,
Just,
yeah.
two private properties, if they wanna build a fence, they can work it out between themselves, they can do whatever they want between themselves.
Yeah, we can't
I'm not sure
require,
why we have any involvement
we
in
don't.
that. If they're in compliance with what the setbacks are,
Right, yeah, I think
that's
that's,
kind of the way I'm thinking of
I
it.
think that's right, as second matter, but the applicant agreed, I think, to take some steps. So the question is, do we make that agreement a condition, or do we instead just rely on the applicant's word that they're going to do that? I mean,
Well,
Mr. Robbins.
what would happen if we just said, the applicant has agreed to work with staff to ameliorate concerns around setbacks for this particular area, whatever, it's around 21 in the clubhouse. And that's notes that something has been said in the direction that folks want it to go, but it also leaves it up in the air enough so that that allows for a lot of different resolutions. I think that's about as far as we can go, because they are, my understanding is they are fully compliant with the rules and regulations at this point. They don't have to do anything if they don't want to, and they are making an offer to do it. We're memorializing that offer, and we go from there.
And we're talking about putting in a stipulation. That doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, that's just it. What it does is memorialize, stipulation meaning a requirement.
Yeah,
The only requirement would be that they would work with staff,
period.
period. And really, we're not, that's it. They've said they'll work with staff to see what they can do. They haven't made a specific offer.
They don't have to.
That's what I'm saying. But they have said that they'll work with staff. And I guess what I'm responding to is the feeling of, well, should we put something in there which at least memorializes what they have said they would do? And,
Complicating things.
okay,
Yeah, unless you say increase it by
Yeah.
5 feet.
Yeah.
or
Okay.
something.
Yeah,
I think.
I almost wanna leave out stipulations that, unless we're gonna really
yeah.
do
All right.
something for it. If you don't, if that's okay.
fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it comes down to, I mean, we run into this a lot with, you know, the applicant agrees, you know, we raise a concern, or the abutters raise a concern. The applicant says, yes, it's a valid point. We're amenable to doing X, Y, Z. So, you know, the question often comes up, do we make that a stipulation that says, okay, the applicant's agreed to this, so we're gonna make that a condition of the plan, or do we just rely on, you know, what they've said at the hearing, what's in the record? So I'm happy to go with the consensus of the board on this one. I mean,
On this one, I don't think we should handicap, you know, lock him in, because, as he said.
right, no, I think it
we're
would have to,
already-
it would
he's
have to be
already-
big. As Scott has said, I mean, it's not as if, you know, Jim said, well, yes, we'll make it 20 feet instead of 10.
Yeah.
So I don't think we could make it very specific. It would have to be pretty generic in terms of working staff. So if the consensus is, let's not bother with the generic stipulation because we're not getting much from it, I'm fine with that.
Plus, if you want to memorialize it, you've got the notes, you've got the,
Yeah, you do have the notes.
all the words are recorded forever.
That's a scary thought.
Memorial-
Anything else?
They've been memorialized already. We don't need to do anything else.
I'm fine leaving it alone.
Okay. Then I think also stipulation number 2, the date's probably August 4th.
August 4th.
Any other? Nothing else?
Mr. Leclerc?
I'll make a motion. So I'd like to make a motion in new business number 2 site plan. Owner Judith M. Walker, Deborah Howe, and Crimson Properties LLC. Location 699 and 701 West Hollis Street. I'd like to make the motion that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D. With the first stipulation being the waiver of 190-208E2, and that being written as is granted and will not be contrary. Stipulation number 2, as written by staff, with the exception of the date of the Gene Walker letter changed to August 4th, 2017. Stipulation number 3, as written by staff, stipulation number 4 be changed since the following wording. Since the abutting properties and the properties across the Nashua River from this lot contain existing trails and pedestrian access easements, the owner shall work with staff on granting a pedestrian easement along the Nashua River to continue to support this use. Stipulations 5 and 6 is written by staff, and stipulation 7 being that the new on-street lighting be provided at 3,000 Kelvin color temperature.
Motion by Mr. Clare is to approve new business number 2, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D, with a total of 7 stipulations. The original 6 from the staff report, as indicated or amended by Mr. Leclerc, and stipulation number 7 is added by Mr. Leclerc. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Kelly. Is there any further discussion?
I do want to have a little further discussion at this. Sake of people getting mad at me. But if the board believes that we get substandard private roads, I think we should do something about that. I'm not in favor of singling out an applicant to pay for a service that we don't ask other applicants to pay for. I'm not in favor of that. But I am in favor of saying if the city engineering department has a concern with the quality of the roads, then the city engineering department should approve the process. They should do it. If they don't have the resources to do it, they can deal with that. But what we shouldn't do is just let them go ahead with the concern that we're getting substandard roadways. The city should fix that. That's what I'm saying. So fix it. Just say, yeah, the city engineering department has to confirm that this road is constructed to the standards the city requires, and then let them deal with that. But I think we're kind of, if we're acknowledging there's a problem, we should speak to it. And I would like to add that stipulation in, not to burden the applicant, because I don't think it would be fair when we don't have that as a requirement. But I do think, looking out for the city, we should make sure that road is done the correct way. And since that's been raised as a problem by the engineering department, I think we should empower them to put the effort necessary to make sure it's okay.
Just before, and I'm sure,
Yeah.
Steve, you want to address it, but
Sure, he's
Before
gonna
you
shut it.
respond to
That's what
that.
I think.
I just have a question, because this was my understanding based on the prior discussion, but I want to make sure it's accurate. Does the city actually, I mean, putting aside the resource issue, does the city actually have the authority to inspect a private road?
You know, I don't know. I mean, it is in the ordinance that private streets have to be built to city standards, 28 feet wide,
Right.
same specs as a public street. So I know we've had some problems with some other private roads, and we're trying to tighten this ordinance, you know, the regulations up and make it stricter and that everybody conforms. You know, I honestly don't know if we have the right to go in.
Discussion item later, so that we have other applicants.
We're not gonna make this applicant responsible, so let's move on.
Yeah, can we do this on a discussion item? Well,
You guys can vote down what I'm saying. I'm just making, I'm offering a stipulation. You guys want to say, no, we're not going to do it?
Yeah, I think Jerry, he's suggesting, in addition to this
Oh.
specific, he's suggesting the addition of a stipulation, so I,
Right, I am.
Well,
But-
I'll tell you what, for the sake of consideration, if you move that as an amendment,
Yep,
I will second it so we can take a vote on it.
okay.
all right, what,
I got discussion items on this, okay?
I'm sorry?
I have a discussion on this, I'd also like to put in this, because I've talked with Roger, and we have had, we have had, from other applicants, retaining walls, and problem with retaining walls. And instead of having the city go out, we had a third party, we required a third party to come in and have the applicant hire a third party to come in and inspect the retaining wall as built. We asked that of another applicant.
If you would like to ask that of this applicant, then ask, but that's not my amendment.
Okay.
My amendment is simply to ask that the city engineering department inspect it. If you want to vote it down, let's vote it down and move on.
And it's been seconded. Did you second that, David?
Has it been made as an amendment?
I don't believe it's been made as an amendment. We were in the discussion period. Mr.
I think I'd have to make the amendment anyway,
Okay.
right?
No, I think Mr. Pucci could make an amendment to your
I,
motion.
I
Mayor
would
Don
like
just
to
wanted
defer to the
attention.
mayor for a minute. I
Mayor
saw a
Don just
hand
said-
up there.
I think you wanted to add to this discussion.
Well, this is a problem I was never aware of, but Mr. Petropoulos has pointed out that in other communities, they pass an ordinance requiring that there be a private inspection and that that be certified at the end. I think that seems like a reasonable approach. So what if we were to try to solve this problem? What if we were asked to ask the planning staff to come up with a proposed ordinance to require an inspection at the end? To make sure that the roads comply with city requirements, consistent with the practice in other communities.
But that wouldn't help us with this.
With all due respect.
No, but what you're saying wouldn't either, aren't you saying, what do you, oh, you're saying that in
I'm
this
saying
instance?
if the city has the ability to inspect the road, require the city, and if the city is concerned with the quality of the roadway, and there's no obligation on the applicant, and there's no ordinance to require them to pay for that, and the city has an engineering department that inspects all of the roads that we build in the city, have them inspect this one to meet the standards they require. And going forward, I think that's the right solution, what you're saying, but that's not gonna help us here.
Yeah, I'm
That-
not sure.
You
we-
can't,
I'm
you
not sure we
can't,
put a stipulation on the
Okay.
city.
you can't lay that on this contractor. Let's deal with this contractor.
Inspect this road.
Well, I wanted to correct Mr. Rapucci's statement. He said a city engineer, ring department has recognized there are problems. No, it's the city.
Okay,
It's more than just the engineering department. And the way our work is laid out, we don't have it in our jurisdiction, within our purview to do private inspection, private roads. We could add that's not a problem. But I cannot commit to doing something that I can't do adequately. We'll end up in the same spot.
okay, respectfully, I just don't think that that's a concern. The resources that are available to do it, it's a different problem. I'm just trying to stay focused on the specific problem of getting a substandard road built, and somehow we're sitting there going, well, if it's substandard, it's substandard. That doesn't make any sense to me. If we think it's gonna be substandard, we should do what we can do to prevent that from happening. That's my point. If people don't agree with me, I'm happy to move on. I just wanted to get it
Yeah, I'm not,
offered so we could consider that. If the board wants to say, no, we're not gonna do that this time, then let's move on.
Like the mayor has suggested, we're already working towards coming up with a plan. We're not there yet. But for this particular one, I can vote for the city engineering department to inspect what it can't do properly. We wouldn't achieve anything. We'll show up for 5 minutes a day and we'll call that good. That's not good enough for me or for anybody. So I think if we wanted to ask some measure of compliance to be provided by the applicant, I think that's appropriate. We have done it a few times. I don't have it right now, but Mr. Weber is correct. We have done it a couple times. We can go back and see. If there is a concern here that this one may not be the problem, especially with the runoff that Mr. Trotter talked about will end up on his property, maybe we can just ask for that particular thing, that an inspector provided by the applicant certifying that the drainage meets the intent of the design plan. You can bring it down to that level.
I think, so, Jerry, I mean, if you want to make an amendment, propose an amendment, you can do that, and we can see if it gets a second and then vote on it. But I think we should then, or if you're disinclined now to make the amendment, that's fine, but I
No,
think we should move forward.
I want to make the amendment, and I think
Okay,
that
so-
he's going to second it, and then everybody's going to
All
vote
right,
it
so
down,
go
and it'll
ahead.
be done in like 30 seconds.
All right, go ahead and so make the amendment.
Okay, I make the amendment that the city be required to inspect this road the way they would any public road, to make sure that it meets the standards that they want it to meet.
Okay, so
That's my amendment.
motion by Mr. Rapucci to amend the current motion made by Mr. Leclerc to approve, to add a further stipulation that would require the city to inspect this private road to ensure that it complies with city standards. Is there a second to that motion?
Second for consideration.
That's seconded by Mr. Robbins.
Discussion. We have a discussion on this.
Yes, discussion
How,
on this.
how can we put a condition on an applicant to require the city to do something? I don't,
That's why we get to vote.
Yeah.
yeah, but that's my discussion, so.
Mayor Donches.
Are we permitted, Mr. Chair, to ask Mr. Petropoulos a question during the debate here?
We'd have to reopen.
We would have to reopen the
All right.
public hearing.
We could, though.
We can do.
We can do that, but.
I think we should. I
Mr.
make a
Chairman?
motion that we reopen it.
Hold on, there's an existing motion on the table.
Well, if it's something that the city engineer can't do, then how about requiring the applicant, and you might want to ask Mr. Petropoulos if his client will agree to it, to have a third-party inspector do this. A third-party inspector. We have done it before, just recently on a subdivision, we did require on Fairmont Street that the applicant's engineers certify it at the end. We just had a pre-construction meeting the other day. So, I mean, if it's a stipulation that you want to put on there, and perhaps if the applicant's agreeable to having a third party, you can certainly ask them.
So first, let's consider the motion before us. I agree with you, Steve. I don't know how we can impose on the applicant a duty to have the city inspect it. Because if you then say, I don't have the resources to do this, what's the applicant supposed to do? So, but with that in mind, I would say, let's take a vote on that motion, and then we can have further discussion if it's necessary. So, as to Mr. Rapucci's motion to amend, which has been seconded by Mr. Robbins, all those in favor?
Just me.
Opposed? No. Okay, motion fails.
All right.
So now we were back to the original motion that was made by Mr. Leclerc to approve with the 7 stipulations indicated. Is there further discussion?
I think the mayor wanted to open the public hearing.
Well, no,
That's the
I
question.
was just wondering about, it was a procedural question.
No, okay.
We good? Sounds like it.
Okay, so, again, on the motion by Mr. Leclerc to approve as originally made with the 7 stipulations, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
This is the favor.
Chose the wrong one.
I figured that was like that.
Mr. Chairman, could we take a 5-minute break?
Okay,
It's gonna waste time now.
the board will be in recess for
What's that?
several minutes, for a bathroom break, 5 minutes. Next on the agenda, new business site plan, case number 3, Bible Baptist Church owner, application and acceptance of proposed one-year extension to NR 1842 to construct a 5,800 square foot building addition. Property is located at 117 Fairview Avenue, sheet 105, lot 5, zoned suburban residence, and this project is located in Ward 6. Can I have a motion, this application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Weber, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Leclerc. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Good evening, Mr.
evening.
Chairman and members of the board. My name is Colleen O'Neill, and I reside at 122 East Hobart Street here in Nashua. I'm also a member of Bible Baptist Church and have been for many years. As you know, we came before you last year, and we unanimously had the plan approved by your board to build an addition to our existing church, but it wasn't, unfortunately, in God's perfect timing, so that we had to put it on hold, and there were some unforeseen circumstances, and now we're back before you asking for an extension as we're now ready to go forward.
And any changes at all to the plan?
No changes to the plan at all.
Questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to this plan? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in favor of this plan? Staff have anything to add?
Staff has nothing to add.
Any other questions? We'll close the public hearing.
Nope.
This concludes the public hearing on this application. We will now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification.
Make a motion that we grant the request and extend the time for a year.
And
Requested by the applicant.
with the one stipulation there.
Yes.
Motion by Mr. Rapucci to approve new business number 3, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D, with the one stipulation as written in the staff report. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Kelly. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. New business site plans, case number 4, Lofts 34 LLC owner. Application and acceptance of proposed amendment to NR 2193 to show proposed 53 parking spaces and associated site improvements. Property is located at 12 to 14 Front Street, sheet 78, lot 68, zoned general industrial mixed use, and this is located in Ward 3. As to new business site plan, case number 4, can I have a motion that this application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Weber, is there a second? Second by Mr. Leclerc. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Something's going on. Well, paper.
You gotta watch your mic.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Jim Petropoulos. I am a civil engineer at Hayner Swanson, doing business at 3 Congress Street in Nashua, New Hampshire, tonight representing Brady Sullivan Properties. With me is Chris Lewis, the architect. Chris is sitting right there in the front row. And as just read into the record, we're seeking a site plan approval for a parking improvement project upon property located on Front Street in Nashua. The subject site is commonly known as the Greely House. Joseph Greely, not Horace. What I'm going to do is present the facts of the case and answer any questions you might have. Brought with me some maps tonight and the board, and that's also on the screen. Just to get everybody located, we're map 78, lot 68. Okay, right here. And it's the Greely House lot, which is a two-story building that measures about 5,000 square feet in size. The lot itself is kind of a kidney-shaped lot, measures about 1.36 acres in size. The site is located in the GI General Industrial Zone and the Mixed Use Overlay Zone. And the GI Zone, of course, as you know, is that older, heavy industrial zone in various parts of Nashua. And what the fathers did is they also blanketed many parts of downtown with the Mixed Use Overlay District, which really gives the planning board the authority to discuss uses and dimensional standards in this particular area. The lot we're talking about tonight is bordered by Front Street to the north, Eversource Substation right here to the east, Nashua River, Cotton Mill Square, and of course this is all formerly part of the Nashua core property. We've got the Carroll Building, and then this building here we'll talk about quite a little bit tonight, 34 Factory Street, which is known as Lofts 34. The Greely House itself sits on the property located up near Front Street. And there's actually a lot happening with this lot. I didn't have enough room on that board, but the existing conditions are up on the screen. There's kind of a lot happening with this property. The site itself contains a rather large overhead power line that runs east-west through the site from the substation to points west for the city. The site is relatively flat with a gentle slope down to the Nashua River. With the Nashua River, we have 100-year flood elevation located really along the banks, but also in the eastern corner of the property. And you remember the Jackson Falls Dam was lowered several years ago, and it helped lower the 100-year elevation in this part of the city. We have the Riverwalk, which is the publicly constructed Riverwalk and fencing all along, about 600 feet, wraps along the river and connects back into Front Street, moves back to Main, and parts also behind Cotton Mill Square. With it, we have a 75-foot buffer along the Nashua River. And a little more than half this site is in the historic district. So there's a lot happening with the Greely House property. Of note, there was previously a 27-space parking lot that was approved in the west part of the site. As usual, Scott does a nice job with a historical snapshot of the property. But the more recent history is that Grace Fellowship purchased a number of the buildings from Nashua Corp in the late 1990s. This particular asset was earmarked actually for redevelopment in the mid-2000s by a large-scale urban renewal project that never came to fruition. Our client, as you know, Brady Sullivan, purchased this Greely House lot, the parking lot across the street, from Grace Fellowship when they purchased the 34 Franklin Street building. They purchased the Greely property with the intent to provide support parking for the Lofts 34 multifamily apartment building. The site plan for Lofts 34 was approved in 2015. And then in March of 2017, this past year, both Chris and I came before this board and received approval to add 32 units in the building without adding parking. You may remember the case. That night, the discussion largely centered around parking. So as I progress with the presentation of the Greely property, I'm going to look back and talk about some of those numbers. What brings us here tonight is the site plan for the Greely property, and that's the map here on the right, the colored map. And we're proposing a 53-space parking lot upon the property. In case you're wondering, the Nashua Land Use Code, section 190-192, permits off-site parking to support a principal use as long as the parking lot is within 300 feet of the principal use and is under the same ownership. So we're able to park here on the Greely property for purposes of using the Lofts 34 building. Now, early on in this process, Brady Sullivan met with the city because the Greely property is a landmark property here in Nashua. It's very visible from Main Street. It's very visible from Water Street. And people have been curious as to what they're going to do with it. So we had early meetings to discuss how could we balance getting parking, and leaving some of the other features that are very important to the citizens of Nashua. And really, we ended up with this plan here tonight that we're proposing. Earlier versions had parking going all the way across the property, all the way around the building to the front. But there was concern, and there was much more parking, but there was concern about some of the view sheds, especially from Water Street, looking across, and even from Main Street, looking at the Greely house. They were very valid concerns. And so what is a result of those early on meetings was this particular plan, where we're proposing 40 spaces in the west part of the lot in a traditional parking lot with an access off of Front Street, dead-end parking. And we're proposing 13 spaces right along Front Street, head-in parking spaces. And what this allowed us to do is leave those view sheds, leave that green grassed area right in through here protected, as you're seeing views. And we've brought some pictures that I'll show you in a few minutes. So there'll be no connection of the two parking lots. With regard to the building itself, Brady Sullivan, as they stated in March, currently the building is used for 3 units, apartment units, but they have no significant plans for redevelopment of the building. When Chris speaks tonight, I'm sure he can explore that in greater detail, but right now it's intended for this application to be 3 residential units. Now, since parking was such a concern in the March hearing for the Lofts 34 project, what I'd like to do is describe the impact of these additional 53 spaces with the Lofts 34 project. Lofts 34 was originally approved with 168 units and 214 parking spaces for a ratio of 1.27 spaces per unit. We amended the plan in 2017 by adding 32 residential units inside the Lofts 34 building. If you remember, Brady Sullivan discovered some lower level space that could be used residentially and wanted to get more units as a result of that. We did, however, lose 8 spaces. So we added 32 units but lost 8 spaces for 206 total spaces, or a 1.03 space per unit ratio. And what we presented was, in accordance with the land use code, the urban nature of the project, the fact that downtown development requires, in the mixed-use overlay district, 1 space per unit, so we were compliant there. But there were some valid points by the board speaking about parking that evening, and the notion that public parking, for instance on Water Street or High Street or Railroad Square, could in fact be used to support this project. Now, if this project is approved, it adds a total of 53 spaces to the 200-unit apartment building. And that would bring the number to 254 total spaces for the 200 units, and we're right back to that 1.27 spaces per unit ratio, which is where we started at the initial approval back in 2015. A couple other elements to the site plan. Stormwater, we intend to use a combination of either porous pavement or permeable pavers in these parking spaces to capture our runoff, introduce it into the groundwater. We have a number of communications about the project that I'd like to quickly describe. The fire department has weighed in saying, guys, you know, Front Street's kind of narrow. We don't want any parking on Front Street, and they've got a great point. So they have suggested that there be no parking signs on Front Street. I think that's a great suggestion, one that Brady Sullivan certainly supports. This board can't enact that. I believe it's an aldermanic action, but I think Chris is going to take it upon himself to move that forward with no parking signs on Front Street. Fire department also revisited the notion of the crossing up here at the end of the Carroll building with Franklin Street. And if you remember, as part of Cotton Mill Square, we needed to secure an at-grade emergency access crossing right there. And that was done. That was perfected. That was built. But there was an accident there, and that gate got damaged. And I believe that that damage was just recently repaired. Chris, is that correct? Yeah. Yes. So that gate is back in full function as an emergency access to the project. I don't think the fire department had the historical perspective on that in their communication. Mr. Chairman, we did appear before the Conservation Commission because a portion of this work is in the buffer, and it's disturbed about 11,000 square feet of buffer. The Conservation Commission offered good feedback to the project. They were supportive of the removal of a number of the invasive species along the river. But they were hoping and felt that I think that there was too many spaces in that side of the site. And they ultimately rejected by vote this particular plan, but did support a plan that would include 27 spaces on this side and 13 here. Now, parking being a premium was a concern to our client, Brady Sullivan. And that's why we're pursuing this particular plan before you tonight with the 53 spaces. We appeared before the Historic District Commission because this part of the site's in Historic District, and presented the 53 space plan and did receive their support and approval for it. Lastly, the engineering department has weighed in with a letter asking about 3 comments, which are very minor, one of which is the no parking on Front Street, which again, we concur with. So we'd have no trouble meeting the engineering department comments. 2 waivers, Mr. Chairman, as part of our application tonight. The first was a request by the city staff to seek 8.5 parking spaces instead of 9 feet wide in these 2 lots. It enabled us to achieve 2 more parking spaces, but it made it a little bit narrower. And that's something we told them we would pursue, just to be a little bit more efficient with our footprint. And so we have a waiver for 8.5 space wide spaces where 9 is required. And then secondly, our lighting has very slight spillover here along the property line with Cotton Mill Square, and of course here along the line with the Eversource substation. I talked to Mr. Stabile today about it. The slight spillover he wasn't too worried about here on the lighting. The Cotton Mill Square building is 400 feet away from our site, so that little spillover is only right along the property line. So those are our 2 waivers. I did not speak to Eversource about the substation because I didn't think it was appropriate. I'd like to conclude by just saying that the site suitability report that we prepared with this application, it really details the benefits of this project along with Lofts 34. It speaks to meeting the goals of the mixed-use overlay district. It speaks to the maintenance of the unique features. Obviously, saving the building, saving the view sheds was important to staff and to the people that Brady Sullivan talked with at the city. Of course, Lofts 34 brings economic benefits to downtown and a long-term positive impact really to the city of Nashua. Both Chris and I think that this is a balanced plan. It tried to meet the goals. There's a lot going on. We kept our parking out of the floodplain. We tried to minimize impacts over by the buffer. We tried to maximize parking, but we also respected really that look. And Tom, I don't know if you've got the picture you can show us. We took a couple pictures. Yeah, it's tough to see on the screen, but looking across the river, the iconic view of the Greely house there. We'll be working with parking over on the annex part. Oh, I can't hit the screen. On the left side of the site, but clearly there'll be no parking in front of the 2-story piece with the columns. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my presentation. I'd be glad to answer questions. Again, Chris Lewis with Brady Sullivan is the architect. You're familiar with Chris from our last meeting, and I'm sure he's probably going to need to weigh in on a couple things as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Mr. Kelly?
Jim, has anybody addressed the issue of the congestion at the corner of Main Street and Franklin?
Yeah.
Mostly created by the parking down there. If we could eliminate the parking on the street, it would make that street much wider and more navigable.
Yeah, I became aware of it. Recently in a call. Actually, John Stabile, when I talked to him today, said, my people are complaining when they come out to Front Street and looking left. When there's vehicles there, they have trouble seeing. And I can't tell if that's construction vehicles or what's there. I meant to talk to Chris about that. Let me give you a little backstory on that. From day one with the redevelopment of the Front Street area with Cotton Mill Square, that intersection was always looked at. In fact, one of the things we did to improve that looking left view was we in fact bumped out some of the sidewalk and some of the noses of the islands there to give that vehicle greater room to get beyond the building to look left. So I think that was a really good improvement The problem is, I think there's cars there, right? Because I think it's the loading area into the main building is there.
Well, what I'm addressing is the parking down to Main Street, more or less from Bonhoeffer's to Main Street.
Oh, okay.
Eliminate that parking,
Oh.
and now the road is wide enough to navigate with these big trucks.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this in March.
Yep.
I do remember it. I'm not sure there's anything I could do. It's out in the city street. It's out in the city right away.
I know, but I think it needs to be brought forward to the city to say,
Okay.
look, you're creating a problem, and the amount of revenue you're getting for a dozen parking meters doesn't justify that congestion. And it's not your problem. I just want to bring it up.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
That's what he said the last time.
Mr. Robbins.
Consistent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Petropoulos, if for some reason the board chose not to grant the waiver number 1 on the parking place, on the parking size, what would that do as far as your need to re-engineer anything? Would you have to re-engineer anything, or would it be just a question of spreading
This-
lines out a little bit?
Yeah, the striping. It would be it would mean 2 less spaces in this parking lot.
All right. But it wouldn't, so you could still do 9 by 20-foot spaces without doing any re-engineering or anything, is that correct?
Yes, I think it's, if I may, the waiver is 8.5 by 18, so there's also a depth issue there. And so going to 9 by 20 would make this center island a little tight. We've tried to keep that as tight as we can, just to minimize the impact, especially along the Riverwalk. So to go to 9 by 20 compliant, it would probably widen out. We'd probably have to push that lot slightly towards Front Street a little bit.
All right, and what about the upper lot? Would that?
No, the other lot, we pulled that away, you know. Head-in parking is not traditional, we know that, but it can work. And those spaces are set back off the edge of pavement well enough, so it's just a width issue, it's not a depth issue.
Okay, and I understand that, okay, so what I hear you saying is, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but this would not cause a significant issue for the developer, is that correct?
Couple less spaces and a little bit retooling of this lot, but you're correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Fucci?
2 things. Did I hear you say that it was the city that asked you to reduce it to the 8.5?
Part of the early meetings was an idea that floated by through the planning department that, hey, you know, if you went to it, it's an encouragement. It's a waiver that I haven't seen that often done in Nashua, but we do see it in other communities that allow 8.5 feet wide parking spaces.
Okay. And my second question is, when the Historic District Commission heard this, were they aware that the Conservation Commission recommended fewer spaces, or what was the change
Yes.
there? So Conservation Commission made their recommendation.
Yes.
Historic Commission was aware of that when they approved what you're asking for now?
Correct.
Thanks. That's all I have.
I forgot a couple things.
Okay.
There is a little kayak launch right here off the Riverwalk. And one of the things was we're dedicating 2 of these spaces for public parking. They'll be signed for the kayak so that they've got space to get access down, to get in, okay? Now, they're not gonna kayak in the winter, so I would suspect in the winter residents would use them, but during summer season, they're reserved. And we did not include those in those numbers that I talked about. In other words, the 3 units will require 3 spaces, and then I took away the 2. So 1.227 is the true number that we got back to.
Mr. Weber?
Jim, are there going to be numbered spaces so that public wouldn't be going dedicated?
So they're not. They're going to be unnumbered spaces. The only numbered spaces, Ed, are going to be the tandem spaces that we built and provided inside this larger parking lot, because they're kind of buddy system back to back. They would need to be coordinated. So these will, no numbered systems. I checked with Chris on that in advance of the meeting, because we talked about that at the last
So
hearing.
you could lose all of these
Lose all of it to,
public parking.
no, it's private parking. It's a private site. It'll be posted as private parking, but
I mean, I'm assuming that the residents would have some sort of permit to park in the lot. I mean, to Ed's point, I mean, you're saying it's gonna be a private lot, it's being posted, and presumably there would be some mechanism if somebody was parking and there wasn't permitted that,
You know, I'm sure Chris will speak. I'm gonna let him drill down on that one.
okay.
One last question. Bonhoeffers, I thought, owned that property behind their facility for parking. Did I hear you say Brady Sullivan now owns that?
No, I believe Grace Fellowship owns it. That's correct. There's a 42-space parking lot right
Yeah.
here, right there,
Right.
behind there. Yeah, I believe Grace Fellowship owns that.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Are you agree?
Yes, thank you. So, in your site suitability report, you mentioned the master plan. Now, I gotta ask this because I brought it up during, I think you presented for Cotton Mill Square, and I don't think it was well received. My question then, so, your reference to the 2000 master plan and then the 2003 downtown master plan. Now, we're talking about master plans that are old. Mr. Kelly's been pushing to get a new one done. So, 17-year-old plan. Do you think what's contained there, what's recommended there is still applicable
Vis-a-vis,
for the site, the suitability of the site?
in regards to what?
We went through a whole number of things, but it's been a good report, good reading. It referenced the market study done back then regarding the residential market. Is the market then the same as now? And the recommendations?
You know, I'm going to let Chris answer that. I think he's got a better pulse on that than I do. If you're talking about the Lofts 34 building, the 200 units, Steve?
Right. Yes, because
I think
obviously,
he's talking about the master plan and its applicability to the plan that you're presenting. Are they compatible?
The master plan of the city of Nashua
It's 20 years old or so.
seeks to promote urban living and downtown living and redevelopment of, I would think, urban sites in downtown Nashua.
right, and that's one piece. And then further in the master plan, it talks about use of the area,
Okay?
and are we still conforming to the recommended use?
You know, you're catching me without a great command of the 2003 master plan. I apologize for that.
That was
but-
referenced, so that's why I thought.
You know, again, I think the plan represents good balance. Thankfully, the Riverwalk's built, it's widely used, as you know, it runs behind Cotton Mill Square. So I'd like to think from a public recreation standpoint that it's attempted to meet the goals of the master plan. In terms of the housing market, I think Chris is better able to answer that. I said the word balance before. Again, I think the preservation of a good chunk of this land here, I think is the right thing to do for the property. So along those lines, Steve, I would say yes, but I don't have a great command of the master plan to know.
Okay. While we're at this, because I believe you already addressed the the waiver, I wanted to ask staff, is a waiver required regarding the parking lot not needing, breaking up a vegetated island? Because the number of spaces in line?
For parking spaces where there is more than 10.
It's a 10, yeah.
And it's on outer parking lots.
That's for
Then it would
interior
require-
rows.
Right. For
We
interior
have,
rows.
we're on the exterior.
Oh, on the
Our
exteriors.
lines are on the outside, so you've got green on the outside and green on the outside. What that ordinance does is for supermarkets and malls, they don't like the big
Yeah.
long rows interior to the perimeter.
Okay,
For this project, a waiver's not required.
all right, thanks.
Okay, I think it would be helpful if Chris maybe said a few words and answered maybe your questions. Chris Lewis from Brady Sullivan.
Sure, that'd be great.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Lewis, Brady Sullivan, I'm the architect. I don't really have a whole lot to add. I think Jim did a great job, but I'd like to answer any questions and just express our appreciation for your consideration on this matter.
So, Ed, you had that one question?
Yes.
Parking? Or
Chris?
Permits?
At some point in time, it's on the Greely house?
Yes.
At some point in time in the future, would you be willing to work with the city of Nashua to turn the Greely house into a historic center to showcase all the different historical buildings and the chronological stages of Nashua for historic value? And the other one is to, and I'm not sure if it is already there, to have a historic easement on the Greely house. Something to think about, not something that's, it's not gonna be part, this is not gonna be part of what we're doing here. It's just a question for you.
Yeah, we bought the property with the sole purpose to help support our Lost 34 project, the 200 units. And, frankly, I think that we've expressed it before to city staff members that we're willing to reprogram the building should there be a specific use in mind. So I think there's absolutely some openness on Brady Sullivan's part to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for Chris?
Well, I do. How about the master plan? Could you offer some comments relative to the master plan that was written 15 or so years ago, and the applicability of the project now, and should it be updated? The master plan be
The
updated?
master plan. I'm probably not the best person to answer those questions. Maybe Tim Cummings would be willing to respond to that if that's all right.
That's okay. We'll address that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who can speak in opposition or concern to this plan? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the committee. For the record, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the city. I will keep my comments brief this evening, as I know we are getting late into the night. I rise before you and stand before you to bring up a couple of points relative to neighborhood stabilization. Part of my role here in the city is to think about neighborhoods and their revitalization and how we can bring about positive economic impact for the value of the city. And it strikes me to suggest to this board it's important to remember some of the economic data points that sometimes get lost. And in particular, we had essentially an empty building that was not used for quite a number of years, and it fell into disrepair. And if I recall, the building was assessed at approximately $1.7 million, generating $42,000-ish in taxes annually. But that was if it was actually being paid. The ownership actually wasn't paying the taxes. It was in arrears by about $700,000. Brady Sullivan came in, purchased the building, and paid off that obligation. When all said and done, this project will generate approximately $500,000 in new revenue for the city, and it will bring 200 units of housing stock to the downtown, which would add a considerable amount of positive economic spin-off. That's not to mention some of the indirect benefits of the 80 or so construction jobs that are being created right now. I wanted to bring these data points to you because I think it's helpful for there to be some context relative to the economics of transformative projects such as this one. Relative to parking, I wanted to just quickly touch on a couple points. The parking waiver was a strong recommendation made by this administration. I'm newer to the city, and coming into the city and looking at things a little bit differently with a little perspective. I've worked in many communities, and I found it rather odd that our parking policy was what I would suggest a little outdated in terms of the best practices seen today. Cars are being constructed much smaller and more compact, so you have seen more efficient uses of land with these types of dimensional policy shifts. So I think it's wise, and I would urge this board to seriously look at addressing that policy as a whole, but for this particular project, you know, adopting that waiver request. Relative to the housing market in the downtown, it's something that I am very familiar with, and something I can speak ad nauseum about. Essentially, our housing market overall in the city is very strong. Apartment buildings right now hover at an occupancy rate of about 98%. We're generating great revenue from a rental rate perspective, something that I think Brady Sullivan's very pleased to see, and is one of the reasons probably they're happy to build here in the city. In the downtown, though, we're not seeing as much activity, so trying to encourage market rate housing in the downtown, so you see some discretionary income, I think is vitally important, is one of the themes that was part of the master plan when originally conceived 20 or some years ago. So I think it's something that does meet the conceptual plans of the master plan, and is something that we should look favorably upon. So with those comments being said this evening, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the board, I hope you act favorably upon this site plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
One question.
Mr. Rubin?
I don't know, so I'm gonna ask a question. Is there a bus line that goes right, that services?
It definitely services. I wouldn't suggest it goes right by the building, but there is a couple bus routes that goes up and down Main Street.
Okay.
Other questions? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Did the applicant have anything further they wanted to add? Any further questions for the applicant? The staff have anything to add?
The only thing I would add is on stipulation number 3, you're gonna wanna add the date of August 4th, 2017.
Thank you. So, are we, everybody ready to close the public hearing? Okay, this concludes the public hearing of this application. We now take our deliberations into the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. Comments, questions? Mr. Pucci?
You know, I was really opposed to approving the additional apartments in without accommodating the parking, if you remember that last hearing. So I think this is really impressive that they went out and did what they said they were gonna do, which is get more parking for those additional units. I think it's a great solution, and I think I just want to reference the fact that I was a little skeptical that I thought that they would do what they said they were going to do, and they did it. So it's good for everybody, in my view.
Mayor Dantas?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to speak in favor of the project because this is a very significant project in terms of providing housing and growth of the economy in our downtown. This will provide 200 units, 300 to 400 residents. I think based upon the experience of Brady Sullivan in other projects, it could bring as much as $125,000 per unit of income to the downtown. In other words, 125,000 times 200 is $25 million of gross income, something that would be very beneficial to the downtown. It will add around $20 million to the tax base. That's about $500,000 of income. In addition, the national statistics suggest that, that people spend about 20% of their income on retail, which means at least there's available 5 million or so of retail spending that the downtown businesses could compete for. And so in the end, this project will help us build a stronger, healthier economy, both in the downtown and for Nashua as a whole. In addition, if you think about our downtown, this is probably the most significant, or one of the two most significant projects that have been undertaken in the last century or more. Most of our major buildings were built in the 19th century, late in the 19th century. The Oddfellows Building and the others on Main Street. Clock Tower, that was done in 87, 88, 89, was certainly probably the most significant project to come along, and is slightly bigger than this one. That's 350 units. But other than that, this is the biggest project. Of course, Cotton Mill is there, but that's 100 units. But other than Clock Tower, this is the biggest project that we have seen in the downtown really in 100 years. And as compared with Clock Tower required $23 million of a federal grant to get that project off the ground and make it viable. This has no federal support, no federal grant. It's totally a market rate project, 100% in the private sector, and therefore one could argue it's the strongest project we've seen in downtown in obviously a long, long time. So I think we should, and the parking that they've asked for is really necessary. As Mr. Petropoulos and Mr. Lewis testified, it's a 1.27 parking spaces per unit, which they need. In fact, the city, through economic development and planning, is trying to work to find them more parking, because 1.5 would work even better. So we're trying to talk with private property owners and others to provide off-street parking to make sure that they have enough and that the project can be fully successful. So I hope that the board will approve the project as proposed and grant them the 53 units, grant them the waiver so we get a couple of extra spaces out of it, and help this project succeed.
Thank you. And I think, the board was very favorably disposed to this project for a number of the reasons you mentioned. The first approval, and then when it came back before us in March. And I think the one concern had been, when we approved the additional units in March, was the parking, as Mr. Rapucci indicated. So, I agree with Mr. Rapucci. I think this is really great to see that they've been able to obtain this additional parking, and I think it just makes the project that much better, so. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question of the chair. We're not talking about approving or disapproving project that's already been approved, is that correct?
That's correct. It is just the site plan for this part.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, that we are talking about a parking of 53 or perhaps a few less spaces, is that correct?
That is correct, yes. We've already approved the site plan on the other site plan for the apartments
All
themselves.
right, so that nothing we did tonight would have any impact on approvals that have already been given to build the project that we've approved?
That's correct, and it's
Okay.
actually under construction.
Yes, it is, thank you. If I may then speak to the parking issue, I would ask that the board not approve waiver number 1 and require that parking spaces be 9 feet by 20 feet. I'd like to speak to that. There are some things that, although very, very small, can be very important when something goes wrong. One of them is to get a ding in your car. One of them is to try to get through a parking space or in a parking lot when somebody's well, the rear end of someone's car is sticking out a foot. While we were talking, I did a little online looking, and a GMC Yukon, large SUV, 17 feet long, 6 foot 9 inches wide. Ford pickup trucks vary from 232 inches to 266 inches long. That's a little less than 20 feet to more than 21 feet. And they're 80 inches, they can be 80 inches wide, which is 6 foot 8 inches. If it were up to me, I would make all parking spaces, in fact, 10 feet wide, the way they are in supermarkets. And I think that to try to do this, it's just not worth getting a couple of extra spaces. And if the city decides that there's a reason to reduce the size of parking spaces, and it's done through ordinance, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I can understand that. But it just seems to me that in this, it's not worth it to try to get an extra couple of spaces out of this space, and which is what I heard Mr. Petropoulos say. It's two spaces to have dings in cars and to have the butt end of cars hanging out of parking spaces. So that my suggestion would be that we do not grant waiver number 1.
Just on what, I agree with what you're saying. I think width-wise, we have control over. I don't think we have too much control over the length, because the only thing it's not gonna change the size of that lot. It's going to change how far the lines come out, but the distance between the cars is gonna remain the same, if you know what I mean. So I think lengthwise, whether we approve this or not, it's not gonna matter. A car's gonna pull in the spaces, there's gonna be the same amount of distance between them. But width-wise,
Well, this reduces the width of the parking spaces.
Agreed.
As well as the depth.
right, but the total space of the lot isn't changing. That, unless and you can correct me if I'm wrong about it, but if you look at it, all you're doing, you're gonna have the exact same distance between the cars that are parked rear to rear. It's just how long the lines are gonna be.
Right, it's
Well,
the drive aisle.
It's just the drive aisle.
I understood Mr. Petropoulos to say that this is something, if this waiver were not approved, that this would be something that they would go back and work with or could work with the city and tweak the lines a little bit. Now, maybe I misunderstood
Okay,
that.
you might be right. I was just pointing that out.
Sure.
That on your width-wise, I understand completely what you're saying.
Okay, no, just-
Well, I think what Mr. Petropoulos said is they would work within the existing lot and they would reduce by 2 spaces. But I wish to respectfully disagree with Mr. Robbins. 2 spaces are valuable. I mean, because we're looking for other spaces, and they're at 253 or 254. They really need a few more. Losing 2 is just 2 more they're gonna have to find elsewhere in a pretty tight neighborhood. Now, Mr. Robbins has cited the size of some of these larger vehicles, SUVs, pickup trucks, but the residents of downtown apartments, say we take Clock Tower as an example, do not typically have these big vehicles. I mean, if you go into the parking lot of Clock Tower, and I walk through there a lot, you know, there's a lot of smaller Toyotas and other vehicles, very few, you know, massive, large vehicles. It could happen, but I think probably Mr. Williams could, excuse me, Mr. Lewis could tell us that typically, you know, the younger and some of the empty nesters who live in residences like this typically have the smaller vehicles. And so to me, it's worth getting the extra spaces. If someone has a big car, maybe they can park up on the main lot. And people with smaller vehicles can park down here if there's a concern about, you know, people getting dinged. So that is my take on it, that we should grant the waiver to give them 2 extra spaces and let them manage the parking in a way that works best for the vehicles that are there.
And I mean, and to Mr. Rapucci's point, I don't think that the depth is really much effect practically. So I think we're really just talking about the width, and it's 6 inches, which I recognize makes some difference, but I think it's reasonable to expect that if the spaces are 6 inches narrower than typical space, that yes, it may mean that folks have to be a little more careful with how they're parking and how they're opening the doors and so forth. But I think, again, I mean, the concern that was expressed when the amended plan was ultimately approved in March was really all about focused on the number of parking spaces. And, you know, so I do think that maximizing the parking in this existing space is important, and I tend to agree that it's reasonable to expect that, you know, that Brady Sullivan can manage the parking and that individuals can, you know, as I said, may have to be a little bit more careful. But I don't think it's taking away that 6 inches and is an unreasonable trade-off for getting the 2 spaces.
Do you know what the other spaces are on the big one?
Mr. Rapucci just asked what the other spaces were, and all I can say is, on the big lot, the standard size is 9 by 20.
Is that what they are, and the rest of it, they're 9 by 20? Mr. Petropoulos is shaking his head yes,
So let's say 9 by 20.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Petropoulos, could you designate,
Well,
You can't do
the
that,
hearing
Dan.
is closed.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could we discuss whether or not it's practical to have a designated area for compact cars only? Would that not be a compromise?
Usually that's depth related, not width.
Yeah.
That's usually shallow, depth challenge.
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah, yeah.
if the problem is width, then compact cars are smaller than F-150s or 350s. So if you put up an area that said compact cars only,
Well, people who live there are going to know, right? They're gonna know that the upper lot has the full-size spaces, and these are a little smaller.
Well,
So
these
maybe it would be
spaces-
self-regulating, because they're not assigning spaces.
these are not, this could be a public parking lot, although they call it a private parking lot. Somebody could come in and bring an F-50, 150.
Well,
If you designate, like at airports, when you go around where the corners are, they designate that as compact cars only.
Right, but those are public parking garages. I do think it is possible that someone, you know, could come in here and try to park in the private lot despite the fact that it's a private
Then
lot.
people will ding them on purpose.
But I do think it's different than if you went into a public parking garage where you'd have those designated compact car spots. I think as Mr. Rapucci said, I mean, here I think we can rely more on it being self-regulating where, you know, people are gonna know which spots are the smaller spots, and, you know, people with larger cars are presumably look for the larger spots. So I guess I'm less concerned about, you know, somebody with a large car who's trying to park in a, you know, as a member of the general public that's trying to park in a private lot.
Well, how are you going to regulate who parks there? I didn't hear anybody say
Yeah, he said it was posted. It's posted private
posted, that's
parking.
it, but not monitored. There's no way to stop somebody from the
I
public.
think at
from
our
parking.
original meeting on this, when we talked about parking, I think the testimony was, it's not permitted, it's not assigned. So it's just, people just park there, which was a big concern of
Right,
the.
and that hasn't changed.
It hasn't. No, it hasn't. I'm not suggesting I'm for one or the other, I'm just saying that's the way that they laid it out. It's not
And that's
controlled, it's
still the
just
same.
posted. It's private parking. You know, if you park there, you're breaking the rule. I don't know what the consequence is. Like, if they don't tag cars, if they don't assign stickers, how do they know who's who? But we went through all that with them in the last meeting.
Right. But that's their issue. If they have that issue, they can come up with a rule and deal with it. You know, I mean, it's not, it's private park. I mean, I like the idea of the wider spaces, but I don't like the idea of dictating to private lots what they need to do. If the city was coming before us for a
Well-
parking lot, I'd probably be more interested in the wider ones, but it's a private lot, you know?
No, we're addressing a waiver.
Right,
So we can, if,
yeah.
we can vote against the waiver.
Right, but all I'm saying is I'm okay if they think it's better for their marketability of their project. I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm sure they're taking that into account. I mean, that they're trying to get this place rented, and if dinged cars are, they're certainly a detriment to the tenant, you know, but I'm sure they've done their homework, and so this is better for us than losing the spots, so. But, I mean, it's a private lot, I'm not sure. I'm fine with the waiver.
Mr. Evans?
Well, two quick things. One of them is it's not their ideas, it's the city's idea.
Right.
So it's not the developer's idea. And the second is that, in one sense, almost every lot is a private lot, in that it's owned by a business or what have you. And yet, we require parking space size. You know, whether it's a retail store or anything else. So is this any different? Or if someone has a parking lot, if someone says, I'm gonna hold this out to be a private parking lot, can we say to them, can they say, well, we're gonna have parking spaces 6 feet wide and 8 feet long?
I think there's a difference between public access and private access.
Well, this is public access. There's been nothing said that limits the access.
But I think there's a difference between a supermarket parking lot,
Yeah.
where you expect that anyone could go and park there, versus a lot, even if it's not, monitored, there's not a gate there or something. It's still the intention, it's gonna be posted that it's a private lot for the residents of this building. And also, I would just note that, this is not, if this were in a different area of the city, you might just practically have a greater possibility of people trying to utilize this lot. I think given where this is located, I don't see people coming downtown and coming to park in this lot to walk downtown, I don't see that as sort of a practical problem, in all likelihood. It doesn't strike me as that, being a huge concern beyond the fact that it's gonna be designated as a private lot. Mr. Weber?
Two things, actually. If, like you guys were saying, if this is a public, there would be complaints to the city that these parking spaces are too small. But the people who will complain to the owners of the building if these parking lots become too small and they're getting dings. They're gonna be presenting this to the owners, hey, these are too small, we need to do something about it. They're not gonna come to the city and say, hey, we need to have this parking spaces bigger. They're not going to. It's gonna resolve itself because of the owner is gonna hear all of these, hey, we're getting dinged, we're getting dinged, we're getting dinged. So that will solve itself quickly to the ownership. As far as if there becomes a problem, it won't be the city's problem, it will be the owner's problem. If I can make a shift and just while I'm talking, at the Historical District Commission, this came before us, and we appreciated that Brady Sullivan and the architect, Mr. Lewis, was very cognizant about the house, and they could have put a parking lot right across all the way and sufficed all their parking problems by doing this, but they're sensitive to the fact that this is a historic site, and they did what they did with the parking. So I would recommend in favor of this. Thank you.
Quick comment, Mr. Chair. And I'm not going to talk about parking dimensions, but I'm going to talk about something that's broader. You have to admit, a large expanse of pavement near the water, whether it's porous pavers or porous pavement. Still not the best use for land like this. I've been sitting on this board since the year 2000, and I've seen a lot of these things go up, and in the end, you shake your head. You know, I understand the necessity, but, you know, having a beautiful river in the middle of the city is a wonderful thing. Other cities have, you know, taken the opportunity to really capitalize on that and, you know, create the uses that will bring a better outlook for the city's future. And I wish that we really come up with a master plan that's we're gonna stick to. Because you revisit that 2003 downtown master plan, and you'd see where we are really not. We're not conforming to it. And I understand you can't, you know, meet every word, every letter, but we should try. We should try to do better. And I understand the necessity because on March 9th, Mr. Rapucci and I voted against adding the 30 units. You might remember that. And it all was because of parking. And then, and before then, it was represented that, well, we are meeting, so it's okay. We're meeting the requirements, so it's okay. We wouldn't have parking, we shouldn't have parking problems. And not too long later, yeah. So maybe they listened to us, maybe they knew then that they were going to have parking problems. So, yes, I understand we're trying to meet a need, and it's, in the end, it's probably a better thing for the city, but just what we're doing to our rivers, or prime, to me, a prime, what I'd say is, we are not looking at the overall future of the city when it comes to utilizing this resource, the river resource. I simply just believe that. But with that, I think that's my comment. Yeah.
I mean, I think I agree with you a little bit, Steve, but I think this is certainly an incremental improvement, this whole project. You know, I mean, it was pretty pathetic before the project started, you know, and I mean, we'd like to get from, you know, A to B, but there's a path there, you know, and we got reality and markets kind of take you along a path, and I do think that this is a significant way along the path. Maybe it's not all the way there, but it's definitely better. I mean, a lot.
No, I'm just talking about this lot that's adjacent to the river. I'm not talking
Yeah,
about
yeah. No,
the
I get
Franklin
it.
Street building. No, that's fine.
Right,
I'm just
right.
talking about this lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we put the Jackson Falls condominiums,
Yep.
you know, people have things to say in the end.
Yeah.
You know, what we did to that site.
Yeah.
And what BAE has done, large expanses of pavement, no control of stormwater, what it's doing to the river, it's right there.
Yeah.
And we continue
This
to
is
do
all
that.
in compliance with everything, right? They didn't need any special relief for this, or did they?
Which,
This is all in compliance with what the requirements are for the city. They didn't need
oh,
any.
no, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about,
Yeah.
I'm not, yeah,
Oh,
people, they've been in compliance, yeah, I certainly believe in that, but I'm
Right.
just talking about, you know, as planners, and we here, you know, we're guardians of good planning, I suppose we are. If we're not, then we're probably in the wrong business, but, you know, we bring up the topic of master plan, is are we truly meeting what our master plan, or master planning of the city should be, are we?
I still think we are, because I think that by adding some vitality down there, it gives more opportunity for the rest of the corridor, you know what I mean? It's
So I
bringing it
think,
along.
I'm Mr. Clay, I think I'm
Yeah.
talking about the natural resource of the river.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying getting people down there helps, you know, you can't build on the river if there's nobody there. You know, we gotta get the people down there, and part of that is getting people to move down there so that they can spend money down there. You know?
I don't think, when you're done and you have 53 cars parked there,
Yeah.
take a look at it.
Mayor Donches.
On Steve's point, this although this parking is necessary now, in the medium to long term, this may not be the solution. I mean, there are a number of lots, and you can see them on the photograph, along Franklin Street, where in the end, there may need to be structured parking, which would then be available to Brady Sullivan and others in the neighborhood. Now, right now, those are owned by Grace Fellowship, and there's not the ability to reach an agreement right now regarding the use of those lots. But I think long-term, it's just, in the end, something will happen, and that would make this site, this part of the lot, this parking maybe not necessary, but that might be down, 5 years from now or something like that. They do need it now. This was discussed in some depth at the Historic District Commission. Just about, there could be, this could be kind of an interim step and a transition to something else in the future. I would also add that if you look at Cotton Mill Square, of course, if you walk down the Riverwalk, their parking is no closer to the river than this would be. I mean, this is no closer than that is. It's pretty good. I mean, and Steve is right about the beauty of the river, and so the city is developing a, riverfront plan. We've come forward with a project that would add, over time, $20 million of improvements along the river, river walks, and other very, really striking improvements. But this is not really, as long as the front of the house is preserved with the lawn, this is not inconsistent with anything that is in the riverfront plan, which has been presented, but has not been written into a final report yet. In any event, I still think that the two spaces are valuable at the moment, and will help to make this a project that is successful.
Mr. Barber?
Mayor brought up a point that now I recall. Brady did make the commitment that if this won't necessarily stay, that if in the future another parking area comes forth, this will be removed. They want to take this out if parking can exceed what they need in another area. This is a temporary, what they said in the minutes for us is that this would be a temporary, I'm not going to put words in their mouth but that was in ours, that if other parking areas become, that this can go away, because we wanted no parking in front of the house at all, but we said, fine, because you needed it, that's okay. If in the future date you can take it away, that would be great. But
I'm relieved.
I still think it's a path. I think you gotta get the people down there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a parking lot. It's very easy to build another building where that parking lot is if you put up structured parking at a later date, but you gotta get the development going to be able to support the structured parking, to support the next building. I mean, it's all linked, So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents. Totally agree with you. I'm sure, a nice building along that thing or another park would be great, but I don't think we can get there yet, so. All right, that's all I have.
Other comments? Mr. Claire?
I'd like to make the motion in new business number 4, site plans. Make a motion, the owner's Loft 34 LLC, that motion be that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in Site Plan NRO Section 190-146D. The 2 waivers be as written as is granted and will not be contrary. Stipulation number 3, the date of August 4th, 2017 be added, and the remaining 4 stipulations as written.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc to approve new business number 4, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in Site Plan NRO Section 190-146D. with a total of 7 stipulations, the first 2 being waiver request. Reading is granted, will not be contrary. Number 3 with the added date, and the remaining as written in the staff report. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion?
Just one thing.
Mr. Rapucci?
Where we have, I don't know how common this is, but it's very uncommon in my experience, that we have a Conservation Commission recommendation that the Historic District Commission didn't agree with and we're not agreeing with. Should we at least make reference to the fact that we've considered their input, and at least make reference to their communication to us in our motion, that we've considered it, that we're following the recommendations that came from the Historic District Commission?
I mean, I don't know if we need to reference it in the sense of,
Okay.
of a stipulation or something, but I think it's,
Well, just so that we can acknowledge that we considered their input and rejected it, which is basically what we're doing.
right.
I think just by talking about it, it's on the
That's
record.
fine. Okay.
But maybe we can just say now during the discussion period that we did in fact, we were aware that the Conservation Commission did not recommend the plan as proposed, but recommended a different plan, and that we've, based on our discussion, determined that we disagree with that recommendation and agree with the
Okay,
proposed plan.
Okay.
that's all I have.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Oh, Jim, enjoy the shows.
What do we got next?
Midnight.
What?
We're going
Does
till
it
midnight.
usually go late like this?
That's it.
Well, we've only got one left.
New business site plans, case number 5, the Golo LLC owner, application and acceptance of proposed amendment to NR 2207 to amend previously approved parking waiver to include proposed outdoor seating. Property is located at 38 Broad Street, sheet 61, lots 60 and 172, zone general industrial. This is located in Ward 4.
Thank you.
As to new business case number 5, can I have a motion this application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Rapucci, seconded by Mr. Weber. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Is this for the cameras, or there's nobody in the audience here for this one, but I'm happy to say whatever you'd like?
I'm fine with the,
I don't need it.
We're good.
just rely on what we have in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Chris Rice. I'm with TF Moran. I'm here on behalf of Pagodo LLC, who's the owner and developer of the project at 38 Broad Street. It's the Dunkin' Donuts that's currently under construction. We had gotten original approval back in March of 2016 and then got a one-year extension in March of this year. And then it was brought to our attention at the pre-construction meeting that we had missed on the parking calculation accounting for the outdoor seats that are in the patio area. So the patio area is shown just north of the building in that kind of lighter gray color. The second sheet that I attached on the color-up is actually a plan that was included with the site plan package that shows table and chairs, but you can see that one plan showed them, one did not, and it just was not part of the parking calculation. So when you account for the outdoor tables and chairs, we're proposing 5 tables, 4 chairs each, which is 20 seats. At 1 parking space per 4 seats equates to 5 additional parking spaces being required. We'd originally obtained a waiver to allow 32 parking spaces where 34 are required. Because of the outdoor seating, 39 spaces are now required, so we're asking for an amended waiver to keep the same amount of parking that we have. Their business is primarily drive-through. Based on their other operations, it's typically 85 to 88% of their customers are drive-through customers. Their other facilities, they don't see that the outdoor seating area gets a lot of use. It's really just a convenience, nice amenity to have, but it doesn't increase the number of customers that they get. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, so just to clarify then, nothing is changing on the plan, it's
Nothing
simply
physically
to
changes on the plans. It's just a correction of the parking
correction
calculation.
of the waiver that had been granted, so it's
Correct.
fewer spaces than originally, we thought, the delta being bigger. Okay. Mr. Robert?
Just, it's not showing, so I'm gonna ask it. No. The fencing, you're only showing verticals. Is there horizontals for, in your drawing? Are there gonna be horizontals so little kids
Yes, that
can't
is a
go through?
fenced-in area. for
Yeah,
the
it's
patio.
just not shown, so I gotta
I
ask
believe
this.
that there's a detail.
That's okay, I'll take your word for it. I'll take your word.
And I do remember that we discussed the patio area because I believe the fence was a question that I'd gotten during the initial approval when we were discussing the patio area. So I think everybody was under the understanding that there were some tables and chairs out there. It was just that the parking calculation didn't reflect those seats.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. I will ask, just for the record, is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor? The staff, has anything to
Staff
add?
has nothing to add.
Great. We okay to close the public hearing?
Yep.
This concludes the public hearing on this application. We'll now take our deliberations to the public meeting. The board does reserve the right to recall any party for further clarification. Questions, comments on this? Seems pretty straightforward.
Can't imagine those seats are gonna add any parking requirement whatsoever.
No, and
We
we
already-
all assumed that it was.
We all
seats.
assumed it was, we already approved the waiver, so it's just a matter of how many spaces.
Yeah,
So,
I make a motion.
Mr. Claire?
Make a motion, new business number 5, site plan, Pagoda LLC. That motion that the site plan NRO, section 190-146D, the plan does meet the requirements, and the waiver of 190-198 is granted and will not be contrary, and stipulation number 2 as written, for prior conditions remains.
Motion by Mr. Leclerc to approve new business number 5, finding that it does meet the requirements outlined in site plan NRO section 190-146D. With 2 stipulations, the first being waiver request, reading is granted, will not be contrary, and the second is written as staff report. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. New business site plan, case number 6. This has been postponed to the September 14th, 2017 meeting. Other business, item number 1, review of tentative agenda to determine proposals of regional impact. And has anyone seen the tentative agenda?
No.
Agendas.
I don't think there's one in there.
We
No,
have,
you know what? Because of the month, the way it falls, we don't have our next meeting until next week, so,
okay.
sorry.
So I guess we just, maybe we skip that item, since we have no agenda to review. So we'll make no motion on item number 1, because there's no tentative agenda to review. So other business, item number 2, amendment to the fiscal year 2018 capital improvement program, adding 1 new project. And Dan, did you want to speak to that?
Before.
Oh,
Yeah, so.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
yes.
Before we start on that, I'm gonna recuse myself from this particular piece of the discussion, because my engineering firm has some discussions and interests with this project, so.
Talking about the pack?
Yeah, so,
You can stay here.
yeah, I'm gonna go sit down.
he's gonna just sit in the audience.
Yeah.
You won't leave. All right. Thank you, Scott. And now, Dan, did you want to speak to
Yeah,
this?
Sure I do. The Capital Improvement Committee met to discuss this project along with other projects that were previously submitted, and came up with a ranking of B3, which means that it's still ranked very highly, and then we recognize that it's going to be an economic benefit to the downtown area. But the projects that were approved back in January more address the issue of safety and that sort of thing, which is a higher priority than this one. And I produced a note to go on to the planning board and then on to the mayor and the board of aldermen that addresses how we felt and where it ranks relative to all the other projects that we reviewed.
So this is being newly added entirely, right? It wasn't in
Yep.
the, yeah. Okay. Sounds like a great project.
I agree.
Mr. Weber?
Question, who will be using this or, putting, facilitating improvements or the, using the space? And the reason I'm asking this, I have seen down in the city where I used to live in Medford, they had a great facility for a dance studio. It was 2 stories, state-of-the-art, plenty of people coming into it. It's no longer being used. So I just question who will be inputting, and it doesn't address this. It doesn't say the performing arts, who's going to be using this, where it's, feeding the importance of this. It is an important thing, don't get me wrong. I love, and I think performance centers are a great thing, but nothing has been said as far as here, who's going to be using this facility and how much is it going to be used. So, just
Can
asking
I just
that.
get a point of clarification?
Sure.
What exactly is before us? What do we, I understand Mr. Kelly is presenting this information, but beyond learning of this information, what is our board's involvement tonight?
We are making a recommendation on whether or not to say favorably or unfavorably the request to add this to the capital improvements plan.
Okay.
So that is all.
And its position relative to all the other.
So whether
Right,
it's ranked correctly and whether or not it should be added at all?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Good.
That's okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor Don.
Mr. Cummings could, I think, address Mr. Weber's question if you want to let him.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the committee. For the record, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Director of Economic Development, and I've been the internal project manager for this Performing Arts Center conversation for the city. I won't go into too much detail this evening, but I would be happy to come back if it's the desire of this committee, if you want to add me on as an agenda item, where I'd be happy to go through the public presentations I've given to other boards within the city. However, to answer the question specifically at hand, the city right now is in the early stages of formulating a steering committee that would actually address the operational structure of the asset if we were to actually go forward with building out a performing arts center. Some recommendations were made in the feasibility study that was conducted, and the feasibility study is up and available on the Economic Development's webpage, and I would encourage everyone to look at that. Within that feasibility study, it recommended 2 options. One is creating a nonprofit and having that nonprofit actually steward and program the facility. The facility is being built out with 2 audiences in mind. One audience being the community theater groups that are here in the city, so we can support our local artisans, but also with an eye towards the private sector, so we can attract commercial talent as well. However, another option is, and this is still yet to be determined, is we go out to the private sector and have a third-party operator. That was the highest recommendation made. Both models are very successful, and it's up to the will of the city as to which direction they would ultimately want to go. Hopefully that addresses your question at hand.
Thank you.
You might also want to add that wasn't $36,000 approved by the aldermen to enter in negotiations with Alex's?
That-
Was it yesterday or last night?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, yes, that is correct. The Board of Aldermen did take the initial step of authorizing the funding to be available should we able to execute an option agreement, which the city is currently in the midst of working on with the owner of 201 Main Street.
Thank you. Well, I mean, again, I'm certainly, I'd be favorable towards adding to this, adding this to the capital improvements program, and as I said, it sounds like a really promising project, and I would defer to the recommendations of the capital improvements committee as to where it's ranked. But I would want to move it a favorable recommendation.
If you're moving, I'm seconded.
So I didn't formally make the motion. Does someone want to formally make the motion?
I'll move it then.
Okay, so motion to make a favorable recommendation by Mr. Robbins. Is there a second to that motion?
Well, I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Rapucci. Further discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I'm just missing something in my own head. It's nothing to do with anybody else. Unless we have a reason to disagree with the Capital Improvement Committee, which I haven't heard, and usually they do what diligent work on this stuff, is somebody going to present like a contrary view? Is there somebody who has a position other than what this is? Or is it, you know what I mean? It's like, why wouldn't we approve this, I guess?
If there were contrary views, they were conducted, and they weren't, but they would be available at the meeting. It's an open meeting.
Right.
Anybody can show up,
Right.
but no contrary views.
Okay. So
I think at the Board of Aldermen meeting, excuse me, was it Paula Johnson? Paula Johnson, the local naysayer for a lot of these kinds of projects, expressed her concerns, but that was about it.
And I mean, ultimately, I mean, all the budgeting decisions have to be approved by the Board of Aldermen, right? So
Yeah, the CIC is a
This is not-
recommender.
right,
It
this
is
is not
not
the
a
end of the
decision
process.
maker. And it's an arm of the planning group.
So you've given me an excellent reason to support this, and no one has given me a reason not to.
And then second it and say yay.
So,
Yeah.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Mr. Chair, I was just gonna make a comment during discussion, because if Mr. Rapucci wanted a contrary view, you know my feelings. 6 months later, I still haven't gotten over it. The ranking of bridges is a D.
Bridges?
Red listed bridges.
You recovered nicely. You got
But we
your-
funded it. We funded it in the budget,
Yeah, the
so.
mayor came through for me,
Yeah.
not a capital improvements committee.
Okay, we do have one discussion item. Number one, Liberty Properties, 44 Simon Street, and I understand that Jim is going to speak to this, and Scott's going to join us again.
I will be quick.
You drew the short straw, didn't you?
He's making so much money. Well,
Yeah.
Hourly
They
rate.
pay him by the hour, for God's sakes.
He gets double after 10 o'clock.
That's why he delays it so long.
Because this project is a project of my colleagues, and I mentioned I was coming tonight, so I offered to cover for him.
There you go, that's the first
I
mistake.
knew what I was getting into. For the record, Jim Petropoulos, Sainer Swanson. Thank you. Quick discussion item. Discussion items are rather rare. I haven't had one in a while, but I'll be very brief. I have a client that owns property along Whipple Street and Simon Street in Nashua, and it's the former Teradyne property. And it's a 240,000 square foot building with about 1,100 parking spaces on it. And Liberty Properties bought the properties years ago, and they've really struggled to get tenants in the building. It's a custom building for Teradyne. It doesn't lease well, it doesn't show well, it doesn't position itself well. And they finally have a significant tenant coming in this building. We have submitted plans to this planning board for the September 14th meeting. But because time is such of the essence for construction for this tenant, they wanted me to come tonight, just introduce the project to you, try to get any initial feedback. Forewarned is forearmed, I guess, is in their mind. And so I'm just going to give you some real quick facts about the project and answer any questions you might have. Their tenant is New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. They are consolidating several offices to move here, and they have a rather tight time frame for construction. Most of that construction is interior to the building, so they would like to get started on some building demolition. But again, we filed plans with the planning board. We'll be before you in September. There's two pieces to what we're doing. The first thing we're doing is we're going to subdivide this 18-acre property into 2 lots, okay? And by doing so, this is the lot that the formal site plan will come in on. Talk about that in a second. The balance here, the 6.5 acres, that pavement's going to get cut, and it's going to sit just as it sit, and it's a parking lot for many, many years, and it will become a future development. It's nice to take a 6.5 acre and put it in the Park Industrial Zone list of available properties, because there are very, very few in Nashua, available industrial properties. So what was earmarked for parking for this big building, this big custom building, now will be redeveloped at some point for a nice project on Simon Street. The site plan itself that we're going to bring forward does this. It takes this appendage off. We're going to take off a significant part of that building. We're going to take off about 100,000 square feet of building, reducing the size of the building to 134,000 square feet. Of that, they will put in this new tenant, New Hampshire Health and Human Services. They also have Resonetics in there, and they'll have one more available space in there.
Jim, can I interrupt you for just 1 second? I'm sorry. The videographer just sent me a text that he's locked out of the building and needs to be let back in. Could somebody go downstairs and help him out?
Back door?
Sorry to interrupt you.
What?
Smokers are people too, Jerry. Well, they started locking the door at 9 o'clock, and
He didn't get that memo, I guess.
Okay, I gotta start all over. Oops. So the premise here for the site plan will be to demolish about 100,000 feet, make this building more attractive, make it better present well. We're gonna build parking over in this location. It'll be a multi-tenanted building. They will probably have at that point 2/3 of the building leased, which is good, but it'll show better for the remaining space. And so that's really the presentation in a nutshell. We're going to be for you with formal plans, a formal presentation. It's a redevelopment of kind of a custom site to make it more tenant-friendly. It creates a 6.5 acre usable piece that somebody hopefully will come in someday and do something on. And then this will have a better parking layout, better open space. You can see the site, the conceptual plan here I brought. You see the parking on the north side and the rehabbed parking on the south side. So it's a nice redevelopment project.
Mr. Chairman? What did Teradyne do there?
They were a combination think tank and manufacturer of some form of product. They had a number of facilities.
Concerns?
And it's a weird building. It's a partial 2-story building. There's several levels there, and really Liberty has struggled with leasing it over time. And
Didn't they make circuit boards there?
yeah, sure. And they actually had a big presence on Northeastern Boulevard as well. So they were
Right.
they were in
employed like
several
1,000
places.
people at one time.
Yeah.
It was very big.
Yeah.
But there's no environmental concerns here?
No, not in this building. Not that I'm aware of. I can check for the meeting, for the September meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Circuit boards are not, are classically dirty. The people that make them
the
have
cleaning.
dirty land.
It's the cleaning of the circuit board that's dangerous.
Yep.
Is what gets
Yes, that's part of the manufacturing process.
Mayor Johnson?
Yes, in the site that's gonna be separated, how large a building, how many square feet do you think could be
Sure.
located there to?
So I have a little bit of rule of thumb. For every usable acre, you know, for an office building, you get about 10,000 square feet per acre. So at 6.5 acres would be about a 65,000 square foot building. If it becomes a flex building and parking is less, you can get more building. So I'm gonna guess 65 to 100, Mayor, could go there, which is very desirable. It's a great location. Of course, as you know, Prudential overall supply is getting close to beginning their operation there. And it's gonna be a great site since it's mostly developed, you know, and so I'm hoping they do well with that in the future.
In terms of this, the separate site that you'd be presenting the site plan on, in terms of the impervious area, is it essentially an equal trade in terms of the building versus the new parking?
Yeah, it is. We think it's a better, you know, it's better circulation, it's better, more defined open space in the parking lot. You know, I'll have to check the numbers, you know, Adam, to see the comparison between the two, but we think the building's gonna just show a whole lot better than it currently does.
Mr. Leclerc and then Mr. Robbins?
Is there
Vice versa.
public access to the canal along the border of the property?
I think it's on the opposite side. I think you go down Whipple Street, you cross the bridge, and then the trail is right along the canal on the opposite
So
side.
It's on both sides.
It's on both sides?
Both sides.
Yeah, okay, great. Oh, yeah, sure, because it's down by Overside. Yep,
Yep, it's on both
absolutely.
Okay.
sides.
Thank you.
Mr. Leclerc?
Do you think, fire department or anybody's gonna wanna be able to get, I think it's gonna use the circulation in the lots to go around that building?
I think so. I think,
Yeah.
you know, we've got 2 access points on Whipple Street. We've got full pavement around.
Yeah.
This is a little bit awkward in that it shares with the loading dock area a little bit, but, you know, we've just submitted this.
already
It's
submitted
something
it
we'll
to 'em.
follow up on with the fire department, sure.
And would there be any reason to be like, any kind of cross-access between this and the old site?
Oh, they'll always be incestuously related.
Yeah.
Because they were sold, much like cotton, you know, much like the Nashua Corp stuff, all those sites are gonna be related, whether it's utilities or with access, so. The goal is to get them working independent, but I think they'll retain under the same ownership for now, but this could be sold. If they were, they'd want easements,
Yeah.
you know, for whatever utility. I know there's a sewer interceptor that runs through the property now.
Are you going to look at traffic relative to that intersection, Simon and Ledge?
So we've got a 44% reduction in our building,
Yeah.
so traffic's much less.
But I don't know, we've had growth in UPS and,
You know, frankly, I don't know what's been done for traffic. I'll ask what's been done. Typically, in a project like this, we will compare pre and post. You know, we'll compare what we have. It is a reduction, so it's likely the traffic numbers will be in our favor. I think what Engineer Dukran is saying is, you know, Simon Street and Ledge, and then Simon Street in East Hollis, you know, is a busy stretch of road. And it is.
And your precondition, when did Teradyne leave there? A while.
20 years ago, maybe.
So
Maybe
what-
not that
what's your-
long, but 15.
What's your precondition? Is your precondition really was without Teradyne? It doesn't
Well,
have to be, but
we-
that could come up in the discussion. I mean,
We
is
could
the
fill
real
that,
the
we
real
could fill that
traffic-
building tomorrow without any permits if we could.
Right,
you
right,
know,
but the
so-
real traffic that's there right now is
Usually,
based on Teradyne.
usually they will, they'll look at a full build, they'll look at a full tenancy,
Yeah.
they'll look at a reduction, and they may look at what's currently out there.
Yeah.
Who owns this now?
A group out of Boston, real estate developers, Liberty Properties. Now, their entity, Mayor, is something different. I think it's called Liberty Woods Development, or,
Can you put them in connection with Mr. Cummings, just so he could help
oh, sure.
with the lot, the undeveloped?
They've been longtime owners here. They also bought the Corning building when that went down, and they redeveloped the Corning building. So they've been in Nashua a number of years. Mr. Weber?
So you asked for things. What's gonna happen with the dumpsters? I don't see it, so. Gotta ask. You asked for input.
No, you know, I think it's all in the well here. I think it's all in the loading dock area.
Okay, I didn't see it, so I asked. You
Well,
said for
a
input, and
meeting
I
would
was
not be
laughing the
complete
whole
without that
time.
question.
You bet I'll know the answer on the 14th, though.
Yes, you will. You're gonna have it there because I don't have to ask.
We'll have it there.
I know.
We'll find out. So they asked me to appear, just to introduce it to you. Again, it's, the predominance of the construction is the demolition and the interior work to get this tenant. It's under a tight time frame. I'm gonna leave here thinking that I've got some good comments that we will address, but I'm not, I'll communicate to him that there wasn't anything fatal, you know. Traffic, fire department, dumpster, open space,
Environment.
access, pardon?
Environment.
Environmental, yeah. Okay, good. And I thank you. Now, can I say one thing? Because the first case we didn't really get to completion. The notion of the city wanting to ensure sites are built in accordance with the approved plan is a very good notion. It's not that hard to get there. Other communities do it. And they do it in the manner by which they say that prior to a certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall provide from a professional, you know, could be engineer here for site, a letter of substantial compliance ensuring that the project has been completed in accordance with the plan. That's very fair. What's it take to get there? Jerry, that project there's probably a 2-year project. We probably get 40 weeks of construction. It's probably 2 to 3 hours a week in communications. It adds up, you know, and with an as-built, it's probably a $25,000 to $30,000 number to a developer. But look what you get. You get the insurance, you get the pair of eyes, you get the oversight that you need for every site. Londonderry is very, very attentive to that, where they require as-builts and they require follow-through on this. So it's a very good thought, and I wouldn't limit it to a road. I would limit it to sites and site plans, you know? It's a very, very fair comment, and I don't think it's hard to introduce something to get there, and it would be fair. Now, for me as a professional, I'm not gonna write that letter until I do the work. So, you know, it doesn't mean he has to hire me. He can go hire another firm or do whatever. But if Hayner Swanson is going to write that letter of compliance, we're gonna wanna make sure we inspect subgrade. We're gonna wanna make sure we inspect erosion. We're gonna wanna make sure we look at sewers. We're gonna wanna make sure we look at pavement. And we're gonna wanna make sure we look at punch list items and then an as-built. And that's exactly what I did. In fact, this week, a big project in Connecticut we just finished, did that letter of compliance. And it's a good way to do it. In Jerry, developers don't mind if they know going in what the rules are and the regs are. They don't like being surprised, you know? So, and that's a fairness issue that I think the point you're trying to make tonight. So I think if they're aware of that as an ordinance, they know going in, when they come to see somebody like me and ask for a proposal, I'm gonna have construction services, I'm gonna say, here's what they need, you know, and they might not like it, but at least they're gonna know. And the guy that doesn't do it is gonna get to a CO, and the staff's gonna say, where's your letter of compliance? Well, I didn't do it. Well, you got issues, you know, you gotta know that up front. And, you know,
We've done it here before, but I agree, nobody likes surprises.
Yeah.
It's money, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is, you know, but
It's not uncommon, though. I mean, it's actually more common.
I said to the mayor, I said, you know, you could have, you know, you could have, pick a project. I mean, you could take, you know, you could take the redevelopment of Alex Shoes into a performing arts center and have every design professional in the world design it. But the contractor, there's no construction certifications in New Hampshire. He's just a gentleman who hangs a shingle, and he could build it. You know, so it's a kind of an awkward process here in New Hampshire, and that's a statewide thing.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, certified, they have it in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts,
Yeah.
we were on a
Other
bid list.
municipalities have it, though, like Lebanon, and, I mean, we have to certify all the construction in
Yeah.
Lebanon. Yeah, I mean, it's different, local.
Yeah.
Local is different.
What's the process to make it happen?
Pass an ordinance.
Yeah.
So it's an ordinance issue?
But that would be a building code issue, what you're talking about, I think, about certifications for contractors. But I think what we talked about earlier tonight, this substantial letter of completion, you could almost even argue it could be a condition of approval, you know? If you wanted to make the language right, so that you could just start putting it to staff report, and people are gonna say, what's this? And they're gonna say, well, you know, we want these sites to be built properly.
Do you think it could be done without an ordinance?
It might be, if it
We
becomes
have,
a,
right now, we've done it before here.
yeah.
And we've had roads, we've had parapet wall, I mean, not parapet, retaining walls.
Yeah.
We've had asked for a third party, for when they had a slope, a strong slope. It wasn't, you know, we want to make sure that that's done correctly, because when the contractor comes in, he can put anything in, but
Yeah. It is in the regulations, again, I just finished a project in Enfield, Connecticut. Maybe I'll shoot Linda the paragraph of the ordinance that requires it, and maybe that could morph into either an ordinance or a stipulation, but. Hey,
But you're
look,
right in saying no surprises.
right.
I mean, the guy's bidding a job, he has to know what his investment is. And if this thing comes up at our meeting, then that's wrong.
it is.
Yeah, it is.
It is wrong. That's what I said. It is
Yeah,
wrong.
it is wrong.
You're right.
Yeah. You know, and I'm gonna tell you, 95% of the projects out there, they all wanna do the right thing, but, you know, there's some projects that it just, things go wrong, and the wrong mix of people, and the next thing you know,
It's usually the contractor that the person hires tries to cut corners.
yeah.
That's, and if you have a good contractor, that's where he's gonna do everything because he wants that work again.
Yeah.
But if if the owner doesn't get the right contractor,
Well, thank you for allowing me the
Thank you for your
time.
time and your
Thank you.
information.
thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to suggest that we adjourn for the evening.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Anyone like to second that suggestion?
Second that.
Mr. Robbins. All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, and we are adjourned at 10:57.